Good deeds never go unpunished. Eileen's grandmother never said that she believed in fairy tales and happy endings, in kindness repaid with kindness. But when you save the wrong child in the wrong woods at the wrong time, you learn that some good deeds come with a price too steep to pay. Because the Alpha King doesn't deal in gratitude, he deals in ownership. And Eileen was about to discover that rescuing his dying son would cost her everything. Her home, her anonymity, her hope of ever escaping the cruelty she'd endured. Some debts, she would learn, are paid not in gold but in souls. Chapter 1. Blood on Stone and Broken Baskets. The morning Eileen's life shattered began like every other, with her sister's laughter echoing through the stone cottage, bright and musical, while Eileen scrubbed dried blood from the butcher's floor. "Careful with that brush, Eileen," her stepmother Margot called from the doorway, her voice dripping with honey-coated venom. "We wouldn't want you to damage those delicate hands of yours." "Oh, wait." She paused, examining her own perfectly manicured nails. "Your hands stopped being delicate years ago, didn't they?" Eileen didn't look up. She'd learned long ago that eye contact only invited more cruelty. Instead, she focused on the bristles scraping against stone, on the way the pink-tinged water swirled into the cracks between the tiles. Her hands were rough, yes, calloused and scarred from years of work Margot refused to let her sister Vivian touch. But they were strong. And strength, Eileen had discovered, was the only currency that mattered when beauty failed you. "Mother, must she do that now?" Vivian's voice floated in, sweet as spring rain. "The smell is making me nauseous, and Lord Aldrich is coming to visit this afternoon." Of course he was. Lord Aldrich of the Southern Plains, with his golden hair and his sprawling estates and his obvious infatuation with Vivian's porcelain face. Everyone in Thornhaven Village knew he'd propose within the month. Everyone except Eileen, apparently, who wasn't important enough to be told these things. "Eileen," Margot snapped. And this time there was no sweetness in her tone. "Finish that, and go into the forest. We need wild herbs for tonight's dinner, silverleaf and moon petal. Don't come back until you've filled this basket." She thrust a woven basket at Eileen, one with a hole in the bottom that would make carrying anything nearly impossible. Eileen took it without comment. Protest was pointless. Margot had married her father 8 years ago, 6 months after Eileen's mother died of fever, and had spent every day since making Eileen's existence as miserable as possible. When father was home from his merchant travels, Margot played the devoted stepmother. When he was gone, which was most of the time, her true nature emerged like rot beneath pretty paint. "The thornwood?" Eileen asked quietly, though she already knew the answer. "Where else would moonpetal grow, you stupid girl?" Margot's eyes glittered with something dark. "Unless you're too frightened? I've heard the rogues have been active lately. Wolves without packs, without rules." She smiled. "But you're clever, aren't you? I'm sure you'll be fine." It was a death sentence dressed as an errand. Everyone in Thornhaven knew the Thornwood was forbidden territory, the buffer zone between human lands and the territories ruled by the shifter packs. The rogues who haunted those woods were the outcasts, the mad ones, the wolves who'd been exiled for crimes too terrible to name. They killed humans for sport. But Margot knew Eileen had no choice. Refuse, and she'd be beaten. Return without the herbs, and she'd be locked in the cellar for days. Eileen had spent enough time in that dark, rat-infested hole to know she'd rather risk the forest. "I'll go," Eileen said, rising to her feet. Her knees ached from kneeling on stone, but she didn't let it show. Never let them see weakness. That was another lesson learned in blood and bruises. "Do wear something pretty," Vivian added, not looking up from the embroidery in her lap, delicate roses on white silk, a gift for Lord Aldrich. "It would be a shame if the wolves mistook you for a goblin. Though I suppose in that old dress, it's an honest mistake." They both laughed, their mirth blending into a sound that felt like nails dragging down Eileen's spine. She left without responding, climbing the narrow stairs to the tiny room she'd been given when Vivian demanded the larger bedroom. It was barely more than a closet, just enough space for a straw mattress, and a cracked mirror that had been her mother's. Eileen paused in front of that mirror now, studying the face that had earned her nothing but scorn. She wasn't ugly, not exactly. Her features were too sharp to be beautiful, high cheekbones, a pointed chin, eyes the color of storm clouds. Her hair was dark as midnight, wild and impossible to tame, nothing like Vivian's golden curls. She looked, Margot often said, like something feral, like she belonged in the forest with the beasts. Maybe she did. Eileen changed into her least tattered dress, a deep green wool that had once been her mother's, and laced up her boots. She tucked a small knife into her belt, one she'd stolen from the butcher's shop last year. It wouldn't do much against a rogue wolf, but it was better than nothing. Before she left, she pressed her hand against the cold window pane, looking out at the forest that loomed beyond the village walls. The thornwood was beautiful in autumn, all gold and crimson, but that beauty hid teeth. Everything beautiful did, she'd learned. Everything except her, apparently, who was neither beautiful nor particularly dangerous. The walk to the forest edge took 20 minutes. Eileen passed through the village square, where merchants hawked their wares and children played in the fountain. They all knew her by sight, the butcher's stepdaughter, the plain one, the girl who'd never marry. Some looked at her with pity, others with contempt. Most didn't look at all. Old grandmother Hess was selling bread by the fountain, and she pressed a small roll into Eileen's hand as she passed. "For your journey, child," she whispered. "The forest is hungry today. I can feel it in my bones." "Thank you," Eileen murmured, tucking the bread into her basket. Grandmother Hess was kind, one of the few people in Thornhaven who remembered Eileen's mother, who remembered that Eileen had once been a different girl, bright and laughing, before grief and Margot had carved that brightness away. The village walls were old stone, 15 feet high, built generations ago when the shifter wars had raged across the continent. Now there was peace, of sorts, a tense understanding between humans and shifters that neither side trusted but both sides needed. The gates stood open during daylight, manned by guards who looked bored and underpaid. "Heading into the Thornwood?" one of them asked as Eileen approached. He was young, maybe 19, with nervous eyes. "That's not smart, girl. 3 hunters went missing last week." "I need herbs," Eileen said simply. "I'll be careful." "Careful won't help if the rogues catch your scent." He shook his head but stepped aside. "On your head be it." The Thornwood swallowed her whole. One moment she was in sunlight. The next she was beneath a canopy so thick it turned noon to twilight. The air changed immediately, cooler, damper, filled with the scent of moss and decay, and something else, something wild that made the hair on her arms stand up. This was not human territory. This was a place where different rules applied, where civilization's thin veneer cracked and fell away. Eileen walked carefully, avoiding the paths. Paths meant other travelers, and other travelers meant rogues who hunted them. Instead, she pushed through underbrush, following the sound of running water. Moonpetal grew near streams, her mother had taught her. Silverleaf preferred rocky soil. The basket's broken bottom made everything difficult. Twice she had to stop and rewrap the herbs she'd gathered, using strips torn from her underskirt to create a makeshift lining. Margot would notice the torn fabric and punish her for it, but that was a problem for later. Right now, survival was all that mattered. She'd been walking for nearly an hour when she heard a sound that didn't belong. Not the rustle of wind through leaves or the chatter of squirrels. This was whimpering, high-pitched and desperate, the sound of something small in terrible pain. Eileen froze. Every instinct screamed at her to keep walking, to ignore it, to get her herbs and get home before dark. But her feet wouldn't move, because she knew that sound. She'd made that sound herself, locked in Margot's cellar with bruises blooming across her ribs, and no one had come, no one had cared. Against all reason, against all sense of self-preservation, Eileen followed the whimpering. She found the cub in a clearing 30 yards off her intended path. It was small, maybe 10 weeks old, with fur the color of storm clouds and eyes that gleamed gold even in the dim forest light. One of its back legs was caught in a trap, the cruel metal teeth buried deep in delicate bone. Blood matted its fur, and the whimpering had taken on a desperate, broken quality that made Eileen's heart clench. But it wasn't alone. 3 wolves circled the cub adults, massive and scarred, with eyes that held no light of intelligence or mercy. Rogues. Their fur was matted and filthy, their movements twitchy and wrong. One of them lunged forward, snapping at the cub's exposed throat, and the small wolf yelped in terror. Eileen didn't think. Thinking would have stopped her, would have reminded her that she was human and small and utterly defenseless. Instead, she grabbed a fallen branch and charged into the clearing, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Get away from it! Go! Get out!" The rogues turned as one, and for a heartbeat, Eileen saw her death in their eyes. They were hunger given form, madness wearing fur. The largest one, a brindled male with one torn ear, bared teeth the length of her fingers. But Eileen had learned something in 8 years under Margot's roof. Victims who fought back were less fun to torture. She swung the branch like a club, catching the brindled rogue across the snout. It yelped and stumbled back, more surprised than hurt. "I said go," Eileen roared, and there was something in her voice, some deep, primal fury, that had been building for years that made even the mad wolves pause. They circled her, testing, looking for weakness. Eileen kept the branch moving, kept herself between them and the trapped cub. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her hands shook, but she didn't run, because running meant death, and if she was going to die, she'd die on her feet. The brindled rogue lunged. Eileen swung with everything she had. The branch connected with the side of its head, with a crack that echoed through the clearing. The rogue went down hard, whining, and the other two suddenly lost their nerve. They backed away, ears flat, and then they were running, crashing through the underbrush like the cowards they were. Eileen stood there, shaking, the branch still raised, until she was certain they were gone. Then her legs gave out and she collapsed to her knees, gasping for air that wouldn't seem to fill her lungs. The cub whimpered. Right. The trap. Eileen forced herself to move, crawling to where the small wolf lay. Up close, she could see how beautiful it was, the silver-gray fur, the intelligent gold eyes, the delicate features that spoke of noble bloodlines. This wasn't some common wolf cub. This was a shifter child, young enough that it couldn't take human form yet. "It's okay," Eileen whispered, though she knew it probably couldn't understand her. "I'm going to help you." The trap was old iron, heavy and cruel. Eileen pulled her knife from her belt and began working at the mechanism, trying to pry the teeth apart. The cub whined but held still, as if it understood she was trying to help. It took 10 minutes of grunting effort before the trap finally sprang open. The moment it did, the cub jerked its mangled leg free and scrambled backward, putting distance between itself and Eileen. It stood on 3 legs, the injured one held at an awkward angle, blood dripping onto the forest floor. Their eyes met storm gray and molten gold. "Go home," Eileen said softly. "Go find your pack. You'll heal. You're young. You'll—" The sound of footsteps, human footsteps, crashed through the forest. Voices, rough and excited, called out in the distance. "I saw the rogues run this way. There's blood on the ground, fresh kill. Check that clearing. Hunters. Or worse, rogue sympathizers. Humans who worked with the mad wolves for profit. Either way, Eileen couldn't be found here. A human alone in the thornwood was suspicious. A human with an injured shifter cub was a death sentence. She looked at the cub one last time. "Hide," she hissed. "Now." Then she grabbed her basket and ran. She made it perhaps 50 yards before the world tilted sideways. Her vision blurred. Her legs tangled beneath her and she fell hard, her head cracking against a moss-covered stone. Pain exploded behind her eyes, bright and terrible, and she tasted copper on her tongue. Distantly, she wondered if the rogues had gotten her after all, if she'd been bitten without noticing, if this was poison working through her veins. But as darkness pulled her down, her last thought was of the cub's golden eyes, intelligent and aware, and the strange certainty that she'd just saved something far more important than she could possibly understand. The last thing she heard before consciousness fled was a howl, deep and resonant and furious, echoing through the thornwood like a promise of vengeance. Then, there was nothing but black. Chapter 2. Gold Eyes and Judgment. Eileen woke to the smell of pine and smoke, and the certain knowledge that she was going to die. Her head throbbed with each heartbeat, a steady pulse of agony that made her stomach churn. She tried to move and discovered her hands were bound behind her back, rough rope cutting into her wrists. Her ankles were similarly tied. She was lying on cold stone, no, not stone, wood, polished wood that smelled of cedar and something else, something wild and clean that she couldn't identify. She forced her eyes open. The room was massive, easily 40 feet across, with a vaulted ceiling supported by beams carved from whole trees. Sunlight streamed through narrow windows set high in the walls, catching dust motes that danced like tiny stars. Tapestries hung on the walls, depicting wolves running beneath full moons, battles between shifters and humans, and scenes of forest hunts so detailed she could almost hear the howls. This was not Thornhaven. This was not anywhere human. She's awake. The voice came from her left female, cold as winter frost. Eileen turned her head, ignoring the spike of pain, and found herself staring at a woman who could only be described as magnificent. She stood nearly 6 feet tall, with silver blonde hair that fell to her waist in a thick braid. Her eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and they held the same predatory intelligence Eileen had seen in the cub's gaze. She wore leather armor studded with silver, and a sword hung at her hip that looked well used. How merciful of her, another voice drawled, this one male and dripping with sarcasm. Perhaps she'll even be coherent enough to explain why we found her standing over the Crown Prince with blood on her hands. Eileen's stomach dropped. Crown Prince. The cub. Oh gods. What had she done? I didn't... She started, her voice cracking. Her throat was dry as sand. I was saving him. The rogues. Silence. The command cracked through the air like a whip, and Eileen's mouth snapped shut before she could stop herself. Because that voice, deep and resonant and absolutely drowning in authority, was not one you disobeyed. It was the voice from her dreams, from the howl she'd heard before losing consciousness. It was the voice of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life and wouldn't know what to do with the word if he heard it. Heavy footsteps approached, and then he was there. The Alpha King. Eileen had heard stories about King Darius of the Northern Pax her entire life. They said he'd taken the throne at 19 after his father died in battle. They said he'd united 7 warring packs under one banner through a combination of political genius and sheer, brutal force. They said he could kill a man with his bare hands in under 10 seconds, and that his wolf form was the size of a horse. Looking at him now, Eileen believed every word. He stood well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. His hair was dark as midnight, cut short, except for a longer section that fell across his forehead. His face was all sharp angles, high cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. They were gold. Pure, molten gold, exactly like the cub's, and they burned with an intensity that made her feel like he could see straight through flesh and bone to the terrified girl beneath. He wore simple clothes, dark leather pants, a loose white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and marked with scars. A silver chain hung around his neck, disappearing beneath the shirt. No crown, no obvious symbols of power. He didn't need them. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge. He looked at her like she was an insect. Less than an insect. Like she was a problem he was deciding how to erase. Your name, he said. Not a question. A command. Eileen. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Eileen Thorne. Eileen Thorne. He repeated her name like he was tasting it, testing it for lies. Of Thornhaven Village. It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. How did he know? Had they gone through her things? Questioned the village? King Darius circled her slowly, his boots silent on the wooden floor despite his size. Eileen felt like prey being evaluated by a predator, catalogued, assessed, judged. She forced herself to keep breathing, to not show the terror clawing up her throat. My scouts found you in the Thornwood, he continued, his voice conversational now, which was somehow worse than the anger. Unconscious, bleeding from a head wound, and my son, the Crown Prince of the Northern Pax, heir to 7 territories and bloodlines that stretch back 1,000 years, was caught in a trap, 50 feet away, his leg nearly severed, whimpering like a common dog. The way he said common dog made it clear what he thought of that particular weakness. The trap wasn't mine, Eileen said quickly. I found him like that. The rogues were attacking him. And You what? The Alpha King stopped in front of her, looming. You, a human girl who weighs perhaps 100 pounds soaking wet, fought off 3 rogue wolves. Alone? With a stick? When he put it like that, it did sound insane. I didn't think, Eileen admitted, because there was no point lying to someone who could probably smell deception. I heard him crying, and I couldn't leave him there. Something flickered in those gold eyes too fast for her to identify. Then it was gone, replaced by cold assessment. Commander Lyra, he said, not taking his eyes off Eileen. What did the trackers report? The silver-haired woman stepped forward, her movements predator graceful. The rogue's scent was all over the clearing, Your Majesty. 3 adults, all male, all marked with the madness stink. The ground was churned up from a fight. We found broken branches, disturbed earth, and blood from multiple sources. The prince's blood, rogue blood, and... She paused, and something that might have been reluctant respect entered her voice. Human blood. Hers. She was bleeding before she fell. The trap? King Darius asked. Old iron, illegal design. The kind poachers use for bears. It had been there for days, judging by the rust, set deliberately on a game trail. Commander Lyra's jaw tightened. Someone wanted to catch a shifter cub. They wanted it to suffer. A growl rumbled through the room, low and dangerous, more beast than man. The king's eyes flashed, gold bleeding into his irises like liquid fire. For a heartbeat, Eileen saw his wolf looking out at her, ancient and terrible and absolutely lethal. Then he controlled it, forcing the beast back down. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly calm. And the prince's testimony? He can't shift to speak yet, Your Majesty. He's too young. But Lyra hesitated. He won't leave her side. When the healers tried to take him to the infirmary, he bit 3 of them and stood guard over her unconscious body. We had to have his nursemaid coax him away with fresh meat. Silence filled the room, heavy as stones. King Darius stared at Eileen for a long moment, those gold eyes searching for something. Truth, maybe. Or guilt. She couldn't tell. So, he finally said, either you're the most accomplished liar I've ever met, or you're a fool. A human girl who risked her life to save a wolf she didn't know, in a forest where her kind are forbidden, expecting no reward and no recognition. His mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. Tell me, Eileen Thorne, which is it? Liar or fool? Eileen met his eyes. It was stupid you weren't supposed to hold eye contact with an alpha. Everyone knew that, but she was tired and in pain, and so far beyond fear that she'd circled back to something like anger. Neither, she said quietly. I'm someone who knows what it's like to cry for help and have no one come. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. King Darius's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the room's atmosphere. The tension didn't ease, but it changed quality from the moment before an execution to something more complex. Your Majesty, a new voice called from the doorway. The healers have finished examining the prince. He'll make a full recovery, but the leg will take weeks to heal properly. And he's asking for her. The speaker was a young man, maybe 25, with auburn hair and warm brown eyes. He wore the same leather armor as Commander Lyra, but his held symbols Eileen didn't recognize, probably military ranks. He looked at her with open curiosity rather than hostility. Asking how, Captain Rowan, King Darius demanded. He can't speak. He brought us to this room, Your Majesty. Limped all the way from the infirmary, trailing blood. The nursemaid is beside herself. Captain Rowan smiled slightly. He's quite insistent. King Darius closed his eyes and muttered something in a language Eileen didn't understand. It sounded like cursing. Then he opened his eyes and looked at her again, and this time there was something new in his gaze. Not quite respect, but consideration. Untie her, he ordered. Commander Lyra moved to protest. Your Majesty, we haven't confirmed. My son is a better judge of character than any tracker. His voice was flat, absolute. If he trusts her, that's evidence enough. Untie her. Now. Lyra's jaw tightened, but she obeyed. She drew a knife-silver blade, bone handle, and cut through the ropes at Eileen's wrists and ankles with quick, efficient movements. The moment she was free, Eileen's hands flew to her head, gingerly touching the lump where she'd hit the stone. Her fingers came away sticky with half-dried blood. Can you stand? King Darius asked. Eileen tried. Her legs shook, her vision swam, but she managed to get to her feet through sheer stubborn will. She swayed once, and Captain Rowan moved forward as if to steady her, but a look from the king stopped him. I'm fine, Eileen said, though she absolutely wasn't. You're concussed and probably haven't eaten in 12 hours, King Darius said bluntly. But I suppose if you were foolish enough to fight rogues, you're foolish enough to stand when you should be lying down. Come, my son wants to see you. He turned and strode toward the door, clearly expecting her to follow. Eileen glanced at Commander Lyra, who watched her with suspicious pale eyes. Then at Captain Rowan, who gave her an encouraging nod. Then she forced her trembling legs to move, following the Alpha King through corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. The palace, because that's what this place was, she realized, was unlike anything in Thornhaven. The walls were living wood, grown and shaped rather than cut, with silver veins running through the grain that caught the light. Doors were carved with intricate scenes of forest life. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling, made not of crystal but of what looked like frozen moonlight somehow captured and formed into shape. They passed dozens of people in the corridors, servants, soldiers, courtiers, and every single one of them stopped and bowed low when King Darius approached. Some looked at Eileen with curiosity, others with outright hostility. She kept her eyes forward and her mouth shut. "You fought them with a branch," King Darius said suddenly, not turning to look at her. "The rogues." "Yes, your majesty." "Why not run?" "You had time. The rogues were focused on my son. You could have escaped." Eileen thought about lying, about giving him the answer he wanted to hear, something noble about duty or honor or the treaty between their peoples. But she was too tired for pretty words. "I thought about it," she admitted, "for about 3 seconds. Then I thought about what it would feel like to listen to him scream while I ran away. And I realized I'd rather die than carry that sound in my head for the rest of my life." King Darius stopped walking. He turned to face her, those gold eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she held his gaze, letting him see whatever he needed to see. "You're either remarkably brave or remarkably damaged," he said finally. "I haven't decided which. Can't I be both?" The words slipped out before Eileen could stop them. For the first time, something that might have been amusement flickered across the Alpha King's face. It was gone in an instant, but it had been there. "Come," he said, and continued walking. "Before my son decides to chew through another healer." The infirmary was a large room filled with comfortable beds, each one covered in furs and soft pillows. Herbs hung from the ceiling, filling the air with the scent of lavender and something sharper, medicine maybe. 3 healers bustled around, checking patients and mixing compounds, but they all stopped when the king entered. And there, on a bed near the window, was the cub. He looked so small against the white linens, his silver-gray fur matted in places with healing salve. His injured leg was wrapped in bandages that smelled of honey and something else, magic, maybe. The wound had been severe, but shifters healed fast. He'd probably be running again within the week. The moment he saw Eileen, the cub's ears perked up. He made a sound, half whine, half bark, and tried to climb out of the bed. A middle-aged woman in healer's robes moved to stop him, but King Darius held up a hand. "Let him go, healer Mira." The cub tumbled out of bed, landing awkwardly on 3 legs, and limped across the room as fast as he could manage. When he reached Eileen, he pressed his head against her legs and made that same whimpering sound, but happy now, relieved. Without thinking, Eileen dropped to her knees and ran her fingers through his soft fur. "Hey," she whispered. "Hey. It's okay. You're safe now. You're home." The cub licked her face, his tail wagging so hard his whole back end wiggled. Then he turned and limped back to his father, sitting at King Darius's feet and looking up at Eileen with those intelligent gold eyes, as if to say, "See? I told you she was good." King Darius looked down at his son, then at Eileen, still kneeling on the floor, then back at his son. "It seems," he said slowly, "that I am in your debt, Eileen Thorne." "No debt, your majesty," Eileen said quickly, because everyone knew that owing debts to shifters was dangerous. "I'm just glad he's safe." "That's not how this works." King Darius's voice was firm. "You saved the crown prince's life. By our laws, by our customs. That creates a bond. A debt that must be repaid." Eileen's heart sank. She'd heard stories about shifter debts, about humans who'd saved wolves and been granted wishes or been claimed as mates, or been bound into service for life. Every story ended differently, but they all had one thing in common. The human never got to choose. "I ask for nothing, your majesty," Eileen said, and meant it. "Please. Just let me go home." Something dark flickered across King Darius's face. "Home," he repeated. "To Thornhaven. To the family who sent you into the Thornwood knowing you might die." Eileen froze. "How did he—" "We questioned the village, Eileen Thorne. We spoke to the guards at the gate, to the merchants in the square, to your neighbors. His voice was soft now, which was somehow worse than when he'd been angry. We know about your stepmother. About the impossible errands. The punishments. The cellar. We know that you were sent into that forest to die. Tears burned behind Eileen's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. It's my home, she said stubbornly. It's all I have. Then you have nothing. King Darius crouched down so they were at eye level. And for the first time, she saw something other than cold assessment in his gaze. And nothing is what you'll return to if I send you back. Margot will kill you eventually, if not next month, then the month after. You know this. She did. She'd always known it. But knowing and admitting were different things. What would you have me do? Eileen asked, her voice breaking. I have nowhere else to go. No money, no skills beyond scrubbing floors. I can't. You can stay here. The words fell into the room like stones into still water. Eileen stared at him. What? Stay here. In the palace. Under my protection. King Darius rose to his feet, once again towering over her. You saved my son's life. The least I can do is offer you a life worth living in return. I don't understand, Eileen said slowly. You want me to, what? Be a servant? I want you to be safe, King Darius said. What you choose to do beyond that is your business. But know this. If you return to Thornhaven, you do so without my protection. And Margot will ensure you never see another autumn. He wasn't wrong. And Eileen wasn't fool enough to pretend otherwise. If I stay, she said carefully, what would be expected of me? Nothing but your presence. My son. King Darius glanced down at the cub, who had curled up at his feet, and was watching Eileen with adoring eyes. My son has claimed you as pack. That's rare, for one so young. It means he trusts you, values you. And in our culture, that means you're under our protection, whether you accept it or not. Pack. The word settled over Eileen like a warm blanket, heavy and strange and terrifying. She'd never belonged to anything before, not really. Margot had made sure she was separate, other, unwanted. But here was an alpha king, offering her belonging. It should have been an easy choice. I need time, Eileen said, to think. King Darius studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. You have until morning. Captain Rowan will show you to guest quarters. You'll be fed, given clean clothes, and allowed to rest. Tomorrow, you'll give me your answer. He turned to leave, his son scrambling to follow on 3 legs, but Eileen's voice stopped him. Your Majesty? What's his name? Your son. I saved him, but I don't even know what to call him. King Darius looked back at her. And for the first time, something that might have been warmth entered his golden eyes. Ash, he said softly. His name is Ash. Then he was gone, leaving Eileen alone with healers who wouldn't meet her eyes, and a choice that felt like no choice at all. Chapter 3. Gold Eyes and Judgment. The guest quarters were nicer than any room Eileen had ever slept in. Captain Rowan had escorted her through winding corridors to a suite on the palace's eastern wing, chattering pleasantly the entire way about nothing, in particular the weather, the upcoming harvest festival, how the palace kitchens made the best honey cakes in all 7 territories. Eileen suspected he was trying to put her at ease, and she appreciated it even if it wasn't working. Here we are, Rowan said, pushing open a carved wooden door. It's not the grand suites, but it's comfortable. Bathrooms through that door, wardrobes already stocked with clothes that should fit. Ring the bell if you need anything, someone will come. Eileen stepped inside and froze. The room was 3 times the size of the closet she'd called home in Thornhaven. A massive bed dominated one wall, piled high with furs and pillows in shades of gray and silver. Windows stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a view of the forest that made her breath catch. A fireplace crackled with flames that needed no tending magic, she realized. Everything here was touched by magic. It's too much, she whispered. It's the smallest guest room we have, Rowan said cheerfully. Don't worry, you're not displacing anyone important. Most of these rooms sit empty except during summit meetings. He paused at the door. Dinner will be brought up in an hour. Try to rest, yeah? You look like you're about to collapse. He left before she could argue. Alone, Eileen moved to the window and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. The sun was setting, painting the thornwood in shades of amber and crimson. From here she could see for miles the forest stretching endlessly north, broken only by the silver ribbon of a river in the distance. Somewhere beyond that forest was Thornhaven. Margot. Vivienne. Her father, if he'd even returned from his travels yet. Did they know where she was? Did they care? A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Eileen turned to find a young woman entering with a tray laden with food. She couldn't have been more than 16, with auburn curls and freckles scattered across her nose like constellations. "Begging your pardon, miss," the girl said, setting the tray on a small table. "I'm Petra. I'll be looking after you during your stay. Is there anything you need? A bath, perhaps? Clean bandages for your head?" Eileen touched the wound gingerly. It had stopped bleeding, but it still throbbed. "A bath would be nice. Thank you." "Of course." Petra beamed and bustled toward the bathroom. "I'll get the water running. Oh, and there's a healing salve in the wardrobe gray jar with the silver lid. His Majesty ordered it specially. Said to make sure you used it tonight. The king had ordered medicine for her." Eileen didn't know what to do with that information, so she filed it away with all the other impossible things that had happened today and focused on the more immediate problem, the food. There was enough on that tray to feed 3 people. Roasted chicken with herbs she couldn't name, fresh bread still warm from the oven, butter that smelled like heaven, roasted vegetables glazed with honey, and a slice of berry pie that made her mouth water just looking at it. When was the last time she'd eaten? Yesterday morning, maybe? Margot had sent her into the forest before lunch. Eileen ate like someone might take the food away quickly, barely tasting it. Years of scarcity overriding manners. It wasn't until she'd cleaned half the tray that she remembered Petra was probably watching from the bathroom and forced herself to slow down. The bath was glorious. Hot water scented with lavender, soft soap that didn't sting, and actual clean towels instead of the rough rags she was used to. Petra had left the healing salve on the edge of the tub, and when Eileen finally dragged herself out, she applied it to her head wound. The medicine was cool and tingling, and within minutes the throbbing had faded to a dull ache. The wardrobe held simple dresses and practical fabrics, nothing like the elaborate gowns she imagined nobles wore, but leagues better than her patched hand-me-downs. She chose a soft gray wool that reminded her of Ash's fur and braided her damp hair over one shoulder. By the time she climbed into bed, exhaustion was dragging at her bones. But sleep wouldn't come. Her mind spun in circles, replaying the day's events like a story she couldn't quite believe. She'd saved a prince, fought rogues, been brought to a palace, been offered protection by an alpha king whose eyes held enough power to remake the world. And tomorrow, she had to decide whether to accept. The rational choice was obvious. Stay. Take the protection, the safety, the promise of a life where she wouldn't be beaten or starved or locked in cellars. King Darius had been clear he expected nothing from her except her presence. She could live here, eat proper meals, sleep in a warm bed. She could be safe. But safety came with a price, didn't it? It always did. What would King Darius truly expect from her? What did it mean to be claimed as pack by his son? And what happened if she displeased them, if she broke some rule she didn't know existed? If she proved more trouble than she was worth? At least in Thornhaven, she knew the rules. She knew how to navigate Margot's moods, how to make herself small and invisible, how to survive. Here, she was stumbling blind through a world she didn't understand, and that terrified her more than any beating ever had. A soft scratching at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Eileen sat up, heart hammering. It was full dark now, the room lit only by the magical fireplace. "Who's there?" The scratching came again, more insistent. Moving slowly, Eileen climbed out of bed and approached the door. She pressed her ear against the wood and heard whimpering, familiar whimpering. She opened the door. Ash sat in the corridor, his bandaged leg held at an awkward angle, looking up at her with those impossibly intelligent gold eyes. His tail wagged once, tentative, as if he wasn't sure he'd be welcome. "What are you doing here?" Eileen whispered, glancing down the empty hallway. "Does your father know you're wandering around?" Ash made a soft chuffing sound and limped into the room without waiting for an invitation. He moved to the fireplace and curled up on the rug there, settling his chin on his paws with a contented sigh. Eileen stared at him. You can't stay here. This isn't. But Ash was already asleep, his sides rising and falling with the steady rhythm of puppy dreams. Tiny snores emerged from his muzzle, and one of his back legs twitched like he was running through some invisible forest. Eileen should wake him. Should return him to wherever cubs slept in this massive palace. Should definitely not let the crown prince camp out in her guest room like some common stray. Instead, she grabbed a pillow from the bed and settled on the floor beside him. Up close, she could see the delicate bones beneath his fur, the way his whiskers twitched with each breath. He was so small, so vulnerable. If those rogues had succeeded, "You're going to get me in trouble," she whispered, running her fingers gently through his soft fur. "You know that, right?" Ash's tail thumped once against the floor, even in sleep. Eileen smiled despite everything and let her own eyes close. Just for a moment, she told herself. Just until she figured out what to do, she woke to chaos. "Swear to gods if that cub has gotten himself killed, I will personally." "Your Majesty, please, I'm sure he's just exploring." "He has a broken leg, Mira." "He shouldn't be exploring, he should be resting." "When I find him, I'm going to." The voices were coming from the corridor outside, getting louder with each second. Eileen jerked upright, her back screaming in protest, from sleeping on the floor. Gray morning light streamed through the windows. How long had she slept? Ash was still curled up beside her, but now his eyes were open, and his ears were flat against his skull. He knew he was in trouble. "You," Eileen hissed at him, "are going to get us both killed." The door burst open. King Darius stood in the doorway, his hair disheveled and his shirt half untucked like he'd been frantically searching for hours. Commander Lyra flanked him on one side, Captain Rowan on the other, and Healer Mira hovered nervously in the background. They all froze when they saw the scene. Eileen on the floor in yesterday's borrowed dress, Ash curled up beside her like he'd been there all night, both of them blinking sleepily at the intrusion. "I can't explain," Eileen said quickly. "Can you?" King Darius said flatly. "It wasn't a question. He showed up at my door last night. I was going to bring him back, but he fell asleep, and I didn't want to wake him, and she was babbling." She forced herself to stop. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I should have returned him immediately." King Darius stared at her for a long moment, then at his son, who had the decency to look moderately ashamed, then back at her. "Did he sleep through the night?" he asked finally. Eileen blinked. Yes? I think so. No nightmares? No crying?" "No, Your Majesty." He snored a little, but he snored. King Darius closed his eyes and muttered something in that foreign language again. When he opened them, he looked exhausted. "Ash hasn't slept through the night since his mother died 6 months ago. He wakes every few hours, crying. We've tried everything, nursemaids, sleeping drafts, even having him sleep in my bed. Nothing works." The weight of that statement settled over Eileen like snow. This small, brave cub had lost his mother. And somehow, impossibly, he'd found comfort with her, a human stranger who'd happened to be there when he needed saving. "I didn't know," Eileen whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize." King Darius ran a hand through his already messy hair. "I should be thanking you. If you got him to sleep, then." He trailed off, something complicated crossing his face. "May I come in?" "It's your palace, Your Majesty. It's your room. For now." He dismissed the others with a wave of his hand. "Go. All of you. I need to speak with her alone." Commander Lyra looked like she wanted to argue, but a single glance from her king silenced her. They filed out, Healer Mira shooting Eileen a sympathetic look as she left. The door closed with a soft click. King Darius moved to the window, putting his back to Eileen and Ash. For a long moment, he just stood there, silhouetted against the morning light. Without his usual commanding presence on full display, he looked tired, deeply, bone-weary tired. "His mother was killed by rogues," he said finally, his voice low. 6 months ago, during a border patrol. She was one of our finest warriors, second commander of the Northern Guard, my mate, the future queen. We were supposed to grow old together." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. The rogues ambushed her patrol. She died protecting her soldiers. She died a hero. I'm sorry, Eileen said again, because what else could she say? Ash was 4 months old. Too young to understand death, but old enough to know his mother was gone. He's been difficult since then. Withdrawn, aggressive with anyone who tries to comfort him. The healers said it was grief, that he'd grow out of it. King Darius turned to face her, and his gold eyes were raw with pain. But he hasn't. He just keeps getting worse. Until yesterday, when he woke up from surgery and fought 3 healers to get to you. Eileen looked down at Ash, who had crept closer and now had his head in her lap, watching his father with worried eyes. I don't understand why he trusts me, Eileen admitted. I'm nobody. Just a human girl. From a backwater village. You saved him. King Darius moved closer, crouching down so they were at eye level again, just like yesterday. More than that, you fought for him when you had every reason to run. You saw a creature in pain, and your first instinct was to help. Consequences be damned. That's not nobody, Eileen Thorne. That's someone worth knowing. Heat crept up Eileen's neck. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not from kings. I just did what anyone would do. Anyone didn't. You did. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were warm, calloused, surprisingly gentle. And now my son has claimed you, and I find myself in an impossible position. Eileen's heart began to pound. What position? The position of a father who would do anything to see his child happy, even if it means asking impossible things of strangers. King Darius pulled his hand back. I need to alter my offer from yesterday. Here it comes, Eileen thought. The real price. Stay, King Darius said. Not as a guest, not as a servant. Stay as Ash's companion, his friend, for lack of a better word. Help him through his grief. Help him sleep. Help him heal. For how long? Eileen asked carefully. Until he doesn't need you anymore. 6 months, maybe a year. King Darius's jaw tightened. I'll pay you, of course. Handsomely. Enough that when you leave, you'll never have to return to Thornhaven, or scrub another floor, or endure another cruel word from anyone. You'll have your freedom, truly. It was a generous offer. More than generous, it was life-changing. But something in his tone made Eileen hesitate. And if I say no? She asked. Then I'll have Captain Rowan escort you back to Thornhaven with enough gold to start a new life elsewhere. I won't force you to stay, Eileen, no matter how much my son needs you. He glanced at Ash, and something in his expression cracked. I've lost enough. I won't take your freedom to ease my own pain. The honesty in his voice was devastating. Eileen looked at Ash, who gazed up at her with those golden eyes so like his father's. She thought about the way he'd pressed against her legs yesterday, seeking comfort. The way he'd slept through the night for the first time in months. The way he whimpered in his dreams, probably chasing ghosts of a mother he'd never see again. She thought about Thornhaven. About Margot's casual cruelty and Vivienne's mocking laughter. About the cellar and the bruises and the certainty that one day, Margot would go too far and Eileen would simply stop existing. She thought about this room, this palace, this impossible offer from a grieving king, and she realized there was only one answer she could give. I'll stay, Eileen said quietly. Not for the money, not for freedom. I'll stay because he needs someone, and I know what it's like to need someone who never comes. She met King Darius's eyes. But I have conditions. Something like respect flickered across his face. Name them. I want to learn, Eileen said. Not just how to care for Ash, but everything. Reading, writing, mathematics, history and politics, and all the things I never had time to study because I was too busy surviving. If I'm going to be here, I want to use the time to become something more than what I am. Done, King Darius said immediately. What else? If Ash gets better, if he doesn't need me anymore, I want you to let me go. No debts, no obligations. I want a clean ending. Done. Anything else? Eileen hesitated, then pressed forward. Send word to my father. Tell him I'm safe. He travels for his merchant work, but when he returns, I don't want him to worry. King Darius's expression darkened. The man who married Margot and let her torment you for 8 years? He didn't know, Eileen said softly. Or he didn't want to see. Either way, he's still my father. Please. For a moment, she thought he'd refuse. Then he nodded once, sharp, I'll send word. But if he tries to drag you back to Thornhaven, he won't. Eileen wasn't entirely sure that was true, but she said it anyway. King Darius stood, towering over her once more. But this time, it didn't feel threatening, it felt protective. Then we have an agreement. You'll stay as Ash's companion. You'll be given quarters near his nursery, tutors for your education, and access to the palace library. You'll eat with the household staff or in your room, whichever you prefer. And you'll be paid a monthly stipend that will be held in trust until you leave. He extended his hand. Eileen stared at it for a heartbeat, then reached up and clasped it. His hand engulfed hers, warm and strong. And when they shook, she felt the weight of the promise settling over her like armor. Welcome to the Northern Pack, Eileen Thorne, King Darius said. May you never have cause to regret it. As Ash's tail wagged so hard his whole body wiggled, Eileen couldn't help but think. Too late for regrets now. She'd made her choice. Now she'd have to live with it. Chapter 4. Learning to live instead of survive. Eileen's new quarters were attached to the royal nursery by a connecting door that could be locked from either side, though Ash figured out how to nose it open within the first day, rendering the lock completely useless. The rooms were smaller than the guest suite but infinitely more comfortable, decorated in soft grays and forest greens that reminded her of the Thornwood at dawn. A desk sat beneath the window, already stocked with paper, ink, and books whose spines promised knowledge she'd always hungered for. The bed was smaller too, but still larger than anything she'd slept in before, and Petra had filled the wardrobe with practical dresses in sturdy fabrics. His Majesty said you'd be working with the young prince, Petra had explained while helping Eileen settle in. Can't do that in fancy silks, can you? These are meant for running around, getting dirty, living life properly. Living life properly. As if Eileen had any idea what that meant. The first week passed in a blur of adjustment and awkward navigation. Ash attached himself to Eileen's side like a second shadow, limping after her on his healing leg with single-minded determination. When she ate, he sat at her feet. When she slept, he curled up on the rug beside her bed, or, more often, on the bed itself, despite healer Mira's protests that he needed to sleep in his proper nursery. He's a prince, Mira said on the third day, exasperation clear in her voice. Not a common house pet. There are protocols, traditions. He's a child who lost his mother, Eileen countered quietly, running her fingers through Ash's fur. Protocols can wait until he's finished grieving. Mira had stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. You're either very wise or very foolish. I haven't decided which. That seems to be the consensus, Eileen murmured. King Darius kept his distance, appearing only occasionally to check on his son's progress. Each time, he'd pause in the doorway of whatever room Eileen and Ash occupied, those gold eyes assessing, calculating. Then he'd nod once and disappear, leaving Eileen with the distinct impression that she was being tested somehow, though for what? She couldn't say. The tutors arrived on her 5th day. Master Benedict was a stooped old man with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers who'd been teaching royal children for 40 years. He arrived at Eileen's quarters carrying an armful of books and wearing an expression of poorly concealed curiosity. So, he said, settling into the chair across from her desk while Ash napped on the bed. His Majesty tells me you want to learn. Everything, he said. Where shall we start? Reading, Eileen admitted, heat creeping up her neck. I know my letters, but I'm slow, and writing I can sign my name, but not much else. She waited for judgment, for the condescension she'd seen so many times in Thornhaven when her ignorance showed. But Master Benedict just nodded thoughtfully. A strong foundation then. Good. Too many students try to run before they can walk. He pulled out a slate and chalk. Show me what you know. What followed were 2 hours of the most intense concentration Eileen had ever experienced. Master Benedict was patient but exacting, correcting her letter formation with gentle precision, making her repeat words until they flowed naturally. By the end, her hand cramped and her head ached, but she'd written an entire paragraph clumsy and smudged but hers. "You learn quickly," Benedict said, gathering his materials. "Tomorrow we'll work on reading comprehension. But for now, practice these letters. 30 of each, before bed." He left her with a primer and a sense of accomplishment that felt better than any meal she'd ever eaten. The days fell into a rhythm. Mornings were for lessons, with Master Benedict reading, writing, basic mathematics that made her brain hurt in entirely new ways. Afternoons were for Ash, walking through the palace gardens despite his limp, playing gentle games that wouldn't strain his healing leg. Reading him stories from picture books meant for shifter cubs learning to speak. Ash couldn't respond in words, yet he was too young to shift to human form, but his intelligence shone through in other ways. He'd nudge specific books when he wanted certain stories. He'd herd Eileen toward the gardens when he wanted to explore. And he had opinions about everything, expressed through a complex language of huffs, barks, and pointed stares that Eileen was slowly learning to interpret. "You're spoiling him," Commander Lyra observed one afternoon, watching Ash drag Eileen toward a patch of wildflowers he wanted to investigate. "I'm befriending him," Eileen corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Lyra's pale eyes were unreadable. "He's going to be king one day. Kings can't afford to be soft. He's 5 months old. Right now, he can afford to be whatever he needs to be." Eileen met the commander's gaze steadily. Grief doesn't care about future crowns. Something shifted in Lyra's expression. Not quite respect, but close. "You're braver than you look, human." "I'm more desperate than brave," Eileen said honestly. "There's a difference there, too." Lyra's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Then she nodded once and walked away, leaving Eileen wondering if she'd just passed some kind of test. The palace staff treated her with cautious courtesy. Some, like Petra and Captain Rowan, were genuinely kind. Others watched her with suspicion, clearly wondering what game she was playing, what she hoped to gain from the king's favor. Eileen ignored them all and focused on her work. Let them think what they wanted. She knew why she was here. It was on her 9th day that King Darius summoned her to his study. The room was masculine and efficient, lined with maps and military reports, dominated by a desk carved from a single massive tree. King Darius sat behind it, reading something that made his jaw tight, but he looked up when she entered. "Eileen, sit." She sat in the chair across from him, acutely aware that this was the first time they'd spoken privately since their agreement. Ash, who'd followed her as always, immediately trotted around the desk and sat at his father's feet, looking between them expectantly. "How is he?" King Darius asked, his eyes on his son. "Better. The leg's healing well. He barely limps now. He's eating properly, sleeping through most nights." Eileen hesitated. "He still cries sometimes, when he thinks no one's listening. But it's less frequent than before." Something painful crossed King Darius's face. "And you? How are you adjusting?" "I'm learning," Eileen said simply. "Master Benedict says I have an aptitude for languages. Commander Lyra thinks I'm too soft. Healer Mira thinks I'm undermining royal protocol. But Ash is happy, so I'm counting that as success." "Lyra said you stood up to her about spoiling him." "I said he's grieving and deserves gentleness." "If that's spoiling, then yes." King Darius leaned back in his chair, studying her with that same assessing look she'd seen before. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone more pliable. Someone who'd be grateful enough to never question anything." His mouth quirked. "Instead, I got someone who argues with my military commander and rewrites nursery protocols." "Should I apologize?" Eileen asked carefully. "No." He said it firmly. "Ash needs someone strong enough to stand up for him, even to me, if necessary." He paused. "I received word from your father." Eileen's breath caught. "Is he?" "He returned to Thornhaven 3 days ago. Found you missing. Margot told him you'd run away in the night, probably killed by wolves in the forest." King Darius's voice went cold. She seemed quite pleased about it. Rage flickered through Eileen's chest, hot and sharp. Of course Margot had been pleased. One less problem to deal with. One less reminder of the first wife. "I sent word that you're alive and under my protection," King Darius continued. His response. He slid a letter across the desk. Eileen picked it up with trembling fingers, Her father's handwriting was familiar, neat, and precise, the hand of a merchant who dealt in contracts. To His Majesty King Darius of the Northern Pax. I am grateful for word of my daughter's safety and deeply ashamed that circumstances in my household drove her to such desperate measures. I have confronted my wife about her treatment of Eileen and have made arrangements to ensure such cruelty never happens again. If Eileen is content in your care, I will not demand her return. But I ask that she know she will always have a home with me, should she choose to claim it. I have failed her as a father. I can only hope to someday earn her forgiveness. With deepest respect, Thomas Thorne. Eileen read it twice, then a third time, trying to find the lie in the words, but they seemed genuine, awkward and formal, but genuine. Her father had confronted Margot. He'd finally seen what Eileen had been living through. 8 years too late. Do you want to see him? King Darius asked quietly. Did she? Eileen folded the letter carefully, buying time to think. Part of her wanted to scream at her father, to make him understand exactly what his blindness had cost her. But another part, the part that remembered him before Margot, when he'd been warm and present and kind, just felt tired. Not yet, she said finally. Maybe later, when I'm not so angry. That's fair. King Darius took the letter back. For what it's worth, I think he means it. Guilt doesn't erase 8 years of cruelty. No, but it's a start. He stood, moving to the window that overlooked the training grounds. I wanted to tell you something else. A warning, perhaps. Eileen's stomach tightened. About what? The court is arriving in 2 weeks for the Autumn Council nobles from all 7 territories, here to discuss trade, territory disputes, and politics. He glanced back at her. They're going to be very interested in you. The human girl who saved the crown prince. The woman who's somehow gotten my son to sleep through the night when no one else could. They'll have questions, theories. Some will be kind. Others, he trailed off meaningfully. Others will think I'm manipulating you, Eileen finished, using Ash to gain power or influence. Yes. Are you warning me because you think it's true? Or because you want me prepared? King Darius turned fully to face her. And for the first time, she saw something that might have been admiration in his eyes. The second one. I know exactly what you are, Eileen Thorne. You're a woman who fought rogues with a stick because a child was crying. You're not capable of the kind of cunning manipulation they'll accuse you of. Then why warn me at all? Because knowing you're innocent and proving it to a room full of paranoid nobles are 2 different things. He moved closer, and Eileen had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. The court can be cruel, vicious, even. They'll dig into your past, your family, every mistake you've ever made. They'll try to break you, because if they can, it proves you're not strong enough to be near the crown prince. If you're angry at the cruelty Eileen's already endured and terrified of what's coming, please like this video. Eileen's mouth went dry. What do I do? Survive it. Don't let them see you break. Don't give them ammunition. His hand came up, hesitated, then settled on her shoulder, warm and steady and surprisingly comforting. And remember that Ash needs you. That's worth more than any noble's opinion. Is this another test? Eileen asked quietly, to see if I'm strong enough? No. King Darius's grip tightened slightly. This is me trying to protect someone my son cares about, because I've already lost one person he loved. I won't lose another if I can help it. The raw honesty in his voice made Eileen's throat tight. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Good. He released her shoulder and stepped back, becoming the distant king again. Master Benedict will add etiquette and court protocol to your lessons. Captain Rowan will teach you basic self-defense, not because I think you'll need to fight, but because knowing you can helps with confidence. And I'll personally brief you on which nobles to avoid and which ones might be allies. You're doing a lot for someone who's just here to watch your son, Eileen observed. You're not just here to watch him. You're here because he claimed you as pack. King Darius's eyes held hers. And I protect my pack, always. The word settled over her again. Pack. Family. In the shifter sense. Belonging that went deeper than blood. Eileen had never belonged to anything before. The weight of it was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. I won't let you down, she said. I know. He smiled then, just a small quirk of his mouth, but it transformed his entire face. For just a moment, He didn't look like a grieving king carrying the weight of 7 territories. He looked like a father who'd been given hope. Now go. Ash is falling asleep, and if he naps now, he'll be impossible to settle tonight. Eileen glanced down to find Ash's eyes drooping, his head nodding forward. She scooped him up. He was getting heavier, growing fast, and he snuggled into her arms with a contented sigh. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she said. "Darius," he said quietly. "When it's just us, you can call me Darius." Eileen blinked in surprise. Using a king's given name was a privilege reserved for close friends and family. "I couldn't. You're raising my son. I think that earns you the right." His expression softened. "Besides, Your Majesty gets exhausting after the 1,000th repetition." "Despite everything," Eileen smiled. "Darius, then, when it's just us." She carried Ash back to their quarters, her mind spinning with everything that had been said. 2 weeks until the court arrived. 2 weeks to prepare for nobles who would try to destroy her. 2 weeks to become someone strong enough to survive it. No pressure at all. That evening, after Ash had been fed and played with and finally settled into bed, Eileen sat at her desk and practiced her letters by candlelight. 30 of each, as Master Benedict had ordered. But tonight, she wrote something else too, words that had been building in her chest since the conversation with Darius. "I am Eileen Thorne. I saved a prince. I am learning to read and write and be something more than what I was. I am not afraid." She read the words back to herself, testing their weight. The last line was a lie. She was terrified. But maybe, if she wrote it enough times, it would become true. Outside her window, the thornwood stretched endlessly under starlight, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. Somewhere out there was Thornhaven, and Margot, and the life she'd left behind. Somewhere out there was her father, drowning in guilt he'd earned. But here, in this room, with a wolf cub snoring softly in the next chamber, and ink on her fingers and possibilities spreading before her like roads on a map here, she had a chance. Here, she could become something new. She just had to survive long enough to figure out what that was. Chapter 5: Silk Masks and Hidden Daggers. The autumn council descended on the palace like a glittering storm. Eileen watched from her window as carriages rolled through the gates, each one more elaborate than the last, bearing crests she didn't recognize and nobles dressed in silks that probably cost more than her entire village. The courtyard transformed into chaos, servants rushing to unload luggage, stable hands managing restless horses, and everywhere the sound of voices raised in greeting or command. "Impressive, isn't it?" Captain Rowan said from the doorway. He'd taken to checking on her daily, ostensibly to deliver reports to Darius, but really, Eileen suspected, to make sure she hadn't fled in terror. The council only meets twice a year, spring and autumn. Every noble with enough influence to matter attends. "How many?" Eileen asked, not taking her eyes off the spectacle below. "About 200 this season, plus their attendants, guards, and assorted hangers-on." He moved to stand beside her. "You'll meet most of them at tonight's welcome feast." Eileen's stomach dropped. Tonight? His Majesty thought it best to get it over with. Like removing a bandage, quick and painful. Rowan's tone was sympathetic. "Don't worry. You'll be seated at the high table with the royal family. No one will dare insult you directly with Darius watching." "It's the indirect insults I'm worried about," Eileen muttered. She'd spent 2 weeks preparing for this moment. Master Benedict had drilled her in etiquette until she could recite the proper forms of address in her sleep. Darius had briefed her on the major players: Lord Corvain of the Eastern Marches, who controlled the richest farmland and resented the crown's authority; Lady Selene of the Southern Plains, whose husband had died in the same attack that killed Darius's mate, and who blamed him for not sending reinforcements; Baron Theron of the Western Reaches, who had 3 unmarried daughters and obvious designs on the throne. "They all want something," Darius had explained during one of their evening strategy sessions. "Power, influence, favorable trade agreements, and they'll use whatever leverage they can find, including you, to get it." Now, watching them arrive in their finery, Eileen felt woefully unprepared despite all the lessons. What was she compared to these people? They'd been born to this life, raised in courts and trained in politics. She was a butcher's stepdaughter who'd learned to read 2 weeks ago. You're spiraling, Rowan observed. I can see it in your face. I'm realistic, Eileen corrected. You're catastrophizing. He turned her away from the window with gentle hands. Listen to me. You saved the crown prince. That's not nothing. Half those nobles down there would kill for that kind of favor with Darius. They're not better than you, they're just better dressed. That's a significant difference when you're standing in the same room. Then we'll make sure you're better dressed too. He grinned. Petra's been working with the royal seamstress all week. Trust me, you'll hold your own. The dress arrived an hour before the feast. Petra carried it in reverently, her eyes shining with excitement. Oh, miss, wait until you see it. Madame Elise outdid herself. The gown was deep forest green, the color of the thornwood at twilight, made from silk so fine it seemed to float. The bodice was fitted, embroidered with silver thread in patterns that resembled wolf tracks winding through trees. The sleeves were long and elegant, the skirt full enough to move gracefully but not so elaborate that Eileen would trip over it. It was beautiful without being ostentatious, elegant without screaming for attention. It was perfect. I can't wear this, Eileen breathed. It's too. His Majesty commissioned it personally, Petra said firmly. And Madame Elise will have both our heads if you refuse. Now sit down and let me do your hair. What followed was an hour of primping that Eileen had never experienced in her life. Petra washed and dried her hair, then braided it in an intricate pattern that left some tendrils loose to frame her face. She applied subtle cosmetics just enough to enhance Eileen's features without making her look painted. Simple silver earrings, a delicate silver chain at her throat. When Petra finally let her look in the mirror, Eileen barely recognized herself. The girl staring back looked noble. Not beautiful, her features were still too sharp for that, but striking. Confident. Like someone who belonged in a palace. There, Petra said with satisfaction. Let them try to call you a common servant now. A knock at the door announced Captain Rowan, dressed in formal military regalia that made him look significantly more intimidating than usual. His eyes widened when he saw Eileen. Well, he said. That'll certainly make an impression. Good or bad? Eileen asked nervously. Definitely good. Possibly intimidating. He offered his arm. His Majesty sent me to escort you. Ash is already in the hall. Healer Mira has him for the evening, since he's still too young for formal dinners. Ready? No, absolutely not. But Eileen took his arm anyway. As I'll ever be. The great hall was a masterpiece of architecture and magic. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, supported by living trees whose branches intertwined to form natural arches. Chandeliers of captured moonlight illuminated long tables draped in silver and green, each place setting more elaborate than anything Eileen had seen. Nobles filled the space, a sea of silk and jewels, and carefully constructed smiles. Every single one of them turned to look when Eileen entered. The weight of their stares was physical, pressing against her skin like humidity before a storm. She heard whispers ripple through the crowd, too quiet to make out words but loud enough to convey judgment. Rowan's arm tensed under her hand, but he kept walking, guiding her toward the high table at the room's far end. Darius sat at the center, looking every inch the king in formal black leather and a silver crown that caught the light. Commander Lyra flanked him on one side, and an empty chair waited on the other, Eileen's seat. Other high-ranking nobles filled the remaining places. An elderly woman with white hair and calculating eyes. A middle-aged man whose military bearing screamed authority. A younger woman whose beauty was so perfect, it seemed almost artificial. Darius's eyes found Eileen's across the room, and something flickered in his expression, surprise, maybe, or approval. He stood as she approached, and the entire hall fell silent. Lady Eileen Thorne, he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly. Savior of Crown Prince Ash, an honored guest of the Northern Pack. The title lady wasn't one she'd earned, but no one dared contradict a king. Eileen curtsied as Master Benedict had taught her, not too deep, not too shallow, and allowed Rowan to escort her to her seat. Darius waited until she was settled before sitting himself, which prompted everyone else to finally take their chairs. The gesture was deliberate. By standing for her, by waiting, he'd just publicly declared her importance. Every noble in this room now knew she had the king's favor. Whether that was protection or a target on her back remained to be seen. You look lovely, Darius murmured as servants began bringing out the first course. Madame Elise's work? You knew about the dress, Eileen said quietly. I commissioned it. I told you I protect my pack. His eyes scanned the room, cataloging threats with military precision. Are you ready? No. Good. Means you're paying attention. He raised his goblet, and the hall fell silent again. Welcome, friends and allies, to the Autumn Council. For 2 weeks, we gather to strengthen our bonds, resolve our disputes, and chart the course of our territories. Let us begin with gratitude for the harvest, remembrance of those we've lost, and hope for the future. The nobles echoed his toast, and then the feast began in earnest. The first course was a delicate soup that tasted of herbs and cream. Eileen ate carefully, hyper-aware of every movement, every bite. Across the table, the elderly woman with white hair watched her with undisguised interest. Lady Eileen, the woman said, her voice surprisingly strong. I am Dowager Lady Helena of the Northern Reaches. I knew your mother. Eileen nearly dropped her spoon. You, what? Catherine Thorne, née Ashford. A distant cousin, twice removed, but family nonetheless. Helena's eyes were sharp as glass. She wrote to me once, years ago, asking for help. I'm ashamed to say I never responded. By the time I thought to reach out, I heard she'd passed. The revelation left Eileen reeling. Her mother had family in the Shifter territories, had tried to reach out for help. I didn't know. Of course you didn't. Catherine was good at keeping secrets. Helena's gaze softened fractionally. You look like her. Same eyes, same stubborn chin. She was fierce, your mother. I'm glad to see you inherited that. Before Eileen could respond, a smooth voice cut across the conversation. How fascinating. A human with Shifter connections. One wonders if that's why you were so eager to insert yourself into royal affairs. The speaker was the beautiful woman seated 3 chairs down, Lady Selene. Eileen realized. Widow of the commander who died with Darius's mate. Her smile was razor sharp, her blue eyes cold as winter ice. I didn't insert myself anywhere, Eileen said carefully. I happened to be in the forest when Prince Ash needed help. How convenient. Selene's tone dripped with false sweetness. And now you're living in the palace, educating yourself at the king's expense, seated at the high table during the council. Quite the upgrade from scrubbing butcher's floors. The insult was deliberate, designed to remind everyone of Eileen's low origins. Around them, conversations quieted as nobles turned to watch the exchange. Darius's hand tightened on his goblet, but before he could speak, Eileen found her voice. You're right, she said calmly. It is an upgrade. Just like saving a child's life is an upgrade from standing by while others suffer. But then, we all make our choices about what kind of people we want to be. The implication hung in the air. Lady Selene had stood by while others suffered. She'd done nothing while her husband and Darius's mate died in that rogue attack. Selene's face went white, then red. How dare you? Lady Selene, Darius said, his voice cutting like steel. If you have concerns about Eileen's presence at this council, you're welcome to bring them to me privately, but you will not insult my guest at my table. Is that clear? The king's tone left no room for argument. Selene's jaw clenched, but she lowered her eyes. Of course, Your Majesty. My apologies. She didn't sound sorry. She sounded furious. The feast continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Now the nobles weren't just curious, they were calculating, watching, weighing what Eileen's presence meant, how they could use it, who she might be aligned with. Between courses, more nobles approached to introduce themselves. Some were genuinely kind, like Baron Aldrich of the Southern Plains, whose warm brown eyes reminded Eileen of Captain Rowan. Others were transparently ambitious, like Baroness Meredith, who spent 10 minutes hinting that her son would make an excellent match for someone with Eileen's newfound status. I'm not looking for a match, Eileen said politely. Of course not, Meredith purred. Though one never knows what the future holds. After all, you've already accomplished so much in such a short time. Who knows what heights you might reach with the right connections. The implication was clear. Marry well, leverage your position, climb higher. It made Eileen's skin crawl. By the time the final course arrived, a decadent honey cake that Eileen barely tasted, her face ached from maintaining a pleasant expression. She'd smiled, deflected, and navigated more verbal traps than she could count. Her head throbbed with the effort of remembering names, titles, and territorial allegiances. Finally, mercifully, Darius stood. Thank you all for joining us tonight. The council proper begins tomorrow morning in the state chamber. Until then, rest well. The dismissal was clear. Nobles began filtering out, some casting final measuring glances at Eileen. She remained seated until most of the crowd had dispersed, then finally allowed herself to slump slightly. You survived, Darius observed, a hint of approval in his voice. Barely. Barely is enough. He offered his hand. Come. I'll walk you back to your quarters. We need to discuss what just happened. Eileen took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Her legs felt unsteady, her head still spinning from sensory overload. They walked through the corridors in silence, Darius dismissing the guards who tried to follow. Lady Selene will be a problem, he said once they were alone. She blames me for her husband's death. Blames herself too, probably. Grief makes people vicious. I shouldn't have said what I did, Eileen said. About standing by while others suffer. It was cruel. It was true. And sometimes truth is the cruelest weapon we have. He glanced at her. You handled yourself well tonight. Better than I expected, honestly. I thought I was terrible. You were nervous, which was natural. But you didn't back down when challenged, didn't let Selene intimidate you, and didn't reveal anything you didn't want to. He smiled slightly. That's all anyone can ask in their first court appearance. They reached her quarters. Eileen expected Darius to leave immediately, but instead he paused, his expression troubled. What? She asked. Lady Helena, he said carefully. Did you know about your mother's connection to the Shifter territories? No. I didn't even know her maiden name was Ashford. The Ashfords are an old bloodline human, but with extensive ties to Shifter communities. They've served as intermediaries for centuries. His gold eyes studied her face. If your mother was reaching out to Helena, she might have been trying to bring you into that world, to give you connections that could protect you. Eileen thought about her mother's final months, the wasting fever, the whispered conversations when she thought Eileen couldn't hear. She'd been so young, barely 10 years old. She hadn't understood any of it. She died before she could tell me, Eileen said quietly. Then we'll find out together. Darius reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture surprisingly gentle. Helena is trustworthy. If she says she's family, she means it. That could be useful in the days ahead. Why does everyone keep saying that? The days ahead. What's coming that has everyone so concerned? Darius's expression darkened. Tomorrow, the council will formally discuss the rogue problem. The attacks have been increasing, not just random violence anymore, but coordinated strikes. Someone is organizing them, turning mad wolves into an army, and when that discussion happens, someone will ask how Prince Ash ended up in that trap in the first place. Understanding dawned. They'll investigate. They'll want to know if it was random or deliberate. Exactly. And if they decide it was deliberate, if someone tried to assassinate my son, then we're not just dealing with rogues, we're dealing with treason. His hand fell away from her face. Which means anyone connected to Ash becomes a suspect. Including you. The words landed like stones in her stomach. They'll think I set the trap. Some will suggest it. Others will defend you. Either way, you'll be questioned formally, probably multiple times. Darius's jaw tightened. I'll be there, and I won't let them intimidate you. But you need to be prepared for them to dig into everything, your past, your family, your reasons for being in that forest. Eileen thought about Margot sending her into the thornwood with a broken basket, about the impossible errand that was designed to get her killed. If the nobles discovered that, what would they think? That she'd been suicidal? Desperate enough to betray a kingdom for escape? When? She asked. 3 days. They'll want to establish the facts first. He placed both hands on her shoulders, the weight grounding. Listen to me. Tell the truth. All of it, even the ugly parts. Don't try to protect anyone, not Margot, not your father, not even me. Just tell exactly what happened. And let the council draw their own conclusions. And if they decide I'm guilty anyway, then I'll exile the entire council and rule alone. His voice held no humor. You saved my son. I don't forget that. Neither does my pack. The fierce protectiveness in his tone made Eileen's throat tight. When was the last time someone had protected her? When had anyone cared enough to threaten exile for her sake? "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet, the worst is still coming." But his hand squeezed her shoulders gently before releasing her. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we plan your testimony." He left, and Eileen stepped into her quarters to find Ash waiting on her bed, his tail wagging. Petra must have brought him from the nursery. He jumped down and pressed against her legs, whining softly, sensing her distress. Eileen sank to the floor and wrapped her arms around him. He licked her face, patient and steady, offering comfort the way only children could, absolutely and without reservation. "I'm scared," she whispered into his fur. Ash made a soft huffing sound, as if to say, "I know, but I'm here." And somehow, that was enough. For tonight at least it was enough. Chapter 6. The Inquisition. The 3 days before her formal testimony passed in a blur of preparation and mounting dread. Darius drilled her relentlessly, throwing every possible question the council might ask, and making her answer until her responses were second nature. Master Benedict taught her the proper forms of address for formal proceedings. Commander Lyra, surprisingly, spent an afternoon explaining the psychology of interrogation, how to stay calm, how to recognize when someone was trying to trap her, how to answer only what was asked and nothing more. "They'll try to make you doubt yourself," Lyra said, her pale eyes serious. "They'll phrase questions in ways that make innocent actions sound guilty. Don't fall for it. Stick to the facts, and don't elaborate unless directly asked." "Why are you helping me?" Eileen asked. "You didn't trust me at first." "I didn't. But Ash trusts you. And Darius trusts you. And..." Lyra hesitated. "You remind me of someone. My sister. She was human, too, married into a shifter pack. The nobles ate her alive until she learned to fight back. I won't let that happen to you if I can help it." The unexpected kindness made Eileen's eyes burn. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Survive first." Lady Helena visited twice, bringing information about Eileen's mother that filled in gaps Eileen hadn't known existed. Catherine Ashford had been raised in a human settlement near shifter territory. Trained as a healer who worked with both species, she'd met Thomas Thorne during a trading expedition and fallen in love despite her family's objections. They wanted her to marry a shifter diplomat, Helena explained over tea, someone who could strengthen the Ashford name, but Catherine was stubborn. She chose love over duty. The old woman's expression softened. "I wonder sometimes if she regretted it. Married to a man who was never home, raising a child alone. But when she wrote to me, she never mentioned regret. Only worry for you." "What did she want?" Eileen asked. "In the letter?" "Help finding you a position, something that would use your mother's legacy, maybe training as a healer or diplomat. She knew Thomas would remarry eventually, knew whoever came after would see you as competition for their own children." Helena's mouth tightened. She was right to worry. I should have listened. The guilt in her voice was palpable. Eileen reached across the table and squeezed the old woman's hand. "You're listening now. That's what matters." On the morning of the testimony, Petra dressed Eileen in a simple gray gown that conveyed dignity without ostentation. No jewelry, no elaborate hairstyle, nothing that could be interpreted as trying too hard or grasping above her station. Eileen needed to look like exactly what she was, a young woman telling the truth. Ash refused to let her leave without him. He paced at her feet, agitated, until Darius finally relented. "He can sit with you during the testimony," the king said, fastening his formal crown into place. "It might actually help remind them what this is really about. A child who was nearly killed." The council chamber was circular, designed so no one held a position of obvious superiority. Tiers of seats rose from a central floor where Eileen would stand, ensuring every noble could see her clearly. It reminded her of drawings she'd seen of ancient amphitheaters, places where people had once been torn apart for entertainment. Not an encouraging comparison. The chamber was already full when they arrived. 200 faces turned to watch as Darius escorted Eileen to the center of the room, Ash limping beside them on his now nearly healed leg. A single chair waited for her, a concession to her humanity, since shifters preferred to stand during formal proceedings. Darius squeezed her shoulder once, a brief gesture of support, then took his place in the highest tier beside Commander Lyra. Ash curled up at Eileen's feet, his warm weight grounding. Lord Corvain stood to open the proceedings. He was elderly but sharp-eyed, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. We convened to investigate the circumstances surrounding the attack on Crown Prince Ash 3 weeks past. Lady Eileen Thorne has agreed to provide testimony. All questions will be asked with respect for her service in saving the prince's life. That last part was clearly for the benefit of nobles like Lady Selene, who sat 2 tears up with murder in her eyes. Lady Eileen, Corvain continued, please state your full name and place of origin for the record. Eileen stood, her legs steadier than she'd expected. Eileen Catherine Thorne, of Thornhaven Village in the Southern Marches. And on the day in question, why were you in the Thornwood? Here it was. The first real question. Eileen took a breath and answered exactly as Darius had coached her. I was gathering herbs at my stepmother's instruction, specifically silverleaf and moon petal, which grow only in the deep forest. Your stepmother sent you into forbidden territory? Lady Helena asked from her seat. Alone? Yes, my lady. Did she know the risks? Everyone in Thornhaven knows the Thornwood is dangerous. We're taught from childhood to avoid it. Eileen kept her voice level. But I had little choice. Refuse, and I would be punished. Return empty-handed, and I would be punished. My stepmother's errands were designed to be impossible. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some nobles looked sympathetic, others skeptical. That's a serious accusation, Lord Corvain said carefully. You're suggesting your stepmother deliberately endangered you? I'm stating a fact. Whether it was deliberate endangerment or simply cruelty, I can't say for certain. But the pattern was consistent throughout the 8 years she was married to my father. We'll return to that, Corvain said. For now, tell us what happened in the forest. Leave nothing out. So Eileen did. She described the broken basket, the search for herbs, the sound of whimpering that had drawn her off the path. She explained, finding Ash in the trap, surrounded by 3 rogue wolves. She detailed the fight, how she'd grabbed a branch, how she'd screamed and swung until the rogues fled. You fought 3 adult rogues with a stick, Baron Theron said, his tone openly dubious. Forgive me, but that strains credibility. You're not exactly built for combat. I didn't fight them to win, Eileen corrected. I fought them to survive long enough for them to decide I wasn't worth the effort. Rogues are opportunistic, they want easy prey. I made myself difficult prey. And the trap? Lady Selene leaned forward, her blue eyes cold. You claim you freed the prince from it, yet you have no injuries consistent with handling iron traps. How do you explain that? Ah, here was the accusation hidden as a question. If Eileen had no injuries from the trap, maybe she'd never actually freed Ash, maybe she'd set the trap in the first place. I used a knife, Eileen said calmly. I pried the mechanism open rather than forcing the jaws apart. It took nearly 10 minutes of careful work. If you examine the trap, you'll find scratches on the release mechanism consistent with a blade edge. And do you still have this knife? Selene pressed. No, my lady. I dropped it when I fell and hit my head. Your scouts likely found it at the scene. Commander Lyra stood. We did recover a knife matching Lady Eileen's description. The blade showed scratches consistent with prying metal. We also found her blood on a stone approximately 15 feet from the trap site, consistent with her account of fleeing and falling. Selene's jaw tightened, but she sat back down. The questioning continued for over an hour. They asked about her relationship with her father, her knowledge of shifter politics, whether she'd ever visited the Northern Territories before. They asked why she'd run after freeing Ash instead of staying with him. I heard human voices, Eileen explained. Rough voices, excited about blood. I didn't know if they were hunters or rogue sympathizers. But either way, a human alone with an injured shifter cub would look suspicious. I thought it was safer for both of us if I left. Convenient, someone muttered from the upper tiers. Actually, it was idiotic, Eileen said, a flash of genuine emotion breaking through her careful control. If I'd stayed, maybe I wouldn't have fallen and hit my head. Maybe I could have explained what happened before your scouts assumed the worst. But I panicked, and I ran, and I paid for it by waking up tied up, and accused of attacking the prince I'd just saved. So no, it wasn't convenient. It was a mistake born of fear. The raw honesty seemed to shift something in the room. Several nobles nodded, and even Lord Corvain's expression softened slightly. "Let's address the central question," Corvain said. "Did you know who Crown Prince Ash was when you freed him from that trap?" "No, my lord. I knew he was a shifter cub from a noble bloodline. His coloring and bone structure made that clear. But I didn't know he was the Crown Prince until I woke in the palace. Would you have acted differently if you'd known?" Eileen met his eyes steadily. "No, my lord. A child in pain is a child in pain, regardless of their bloodline." More murmurs, these ones approving. Lady Helena rose to her feet. "I have a question, if I may." Corvain nodded. "The floor is yours, Dowager Lady." "Lady Eileen, you mentioned your stepmother's cruelty. Can you provide specific examples, for the record?" This was the part Eileen had dreaded. Admitting the full scope of her suffering felt like exposing an open wound to salt air. But Darius had been clear. "Tell everything." "She locked me in the cellar for days at a time," Eileen said, her voice quieter now. "Sometimes for minor infractions like speaking without permission. Sometimes for no reason except that she could. She withheld food regularly. She assigned me tasks designed to be impossible, then punished me when I failed. She reminded me daily that I was worthless, unwanted, a burden my father regretted." The chamber had gone silent. Even Lady Selene looked uncomfortable. "Did your father know?" Helena asked gently. "I don't know. He traveled constantly for his merchant work. When he was home, Margot, my stepmother, was careful to hide the worst of it. And Eileen's throat tightened. "I never told him. I was afraid he'd think I was lying, or that he'd choose her over me. Either way, I'd lose." "That's understandable," Helena said. "Abused children often protect their abusers out of fear or misplaced loyalty. It doesn't make them complicit." The statement hung in the air. A clear message to the nobles who might use Eileen's silence against her. "One final question," Lord Corvain said. "And I ask this not to impugn your character, but because it must be addressed. Is there any reason, any person, any promise, any threat that might have motivated you to harm the Crown Prince?" "No, my lord." Eileen's voice was steady. "I had never been to the Northern Territories before. I knew no one here, had no connections to shifter politics, and had no reason to wish harm on anyone in the royal family. I was simply in the wrong place, at the right time to save a child's life." Corvain studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you for your testimony, Lady Eileen. You may be seated." Eileen sank into the chair, her legs suddenly trembling now that the worst was over. Ash immediately climbed into her lap, a warm, comforting weight. She buried her fingers in his fur and tried to steady her breathing. The council deliberated for 3 hours. Eileen remained in the chamber the entire time, listening as nobles debated every aspect of her testimony. Some defended her passionately. Lady Helena, Baron Aldrich, even Commander Lyra rose to vouch for her character. Others, led by Lady Selene, argued that her story was too convenient, her timing too perfect. She appears exactly when needed, saves the Crown Prince, and ingratiates herself into the royal household. Selene's voice dripped with suspicion. "And we're simply to believe this is coincidence?" "Yes," Darius said, speaking for the first time since the testimony began. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Because the alternative is that she somehow arranged for rogues to attack my son, set a trap designed to maim but not kill, then risked her own life fighting those same rogues, all while having no prior knowledge of our territories or customs. That's not a conspiracy, that's fantasy." "Your Majesty is understandably biased," Selene said carefully. "She saved your son. Of course you want to believe the best of her. I believe what the evidence supports." Darius's gold eyes flashed. "The knife. The blood. The broken basket. The testimony of the gate guards who saw her sent into that forest by a woman with documented cruelty. Everything corroborates her story. If you want to ignore that because it doesn't fit your preferred narrative, that says more about you than it does about her." The rebuke was public and devastating. Selene's face went white. Finally, Lord Corvain called for a vote. "All those who believe Lady Eileen Thorne's testimony, and find no evidence of conspiracy or wrongdoing, signify by standing." Eileen held her breath. One by one, nobles rose to their feet. Lady Helena, Baron Aldrich, Commander Lyra. Captain Rowan from his place among the military contingent. More than half the chamber stood within 30 seconds. Lord Corvain counted carefully, then nodded. By a vote of 123 to 77, this council finds Lady Eileen Thorne innocent of any wrongdoing. Her actions in saving Crown Prince Ash are recognized as heroic, and she will be formally honored at tomorrow's court ceremony. Relief crashed over Eileen so powerfully she nearly wept. Ash licked her face, his tail wagging, sensing her emotion. However, Corvain continued, and Eileen's relief faltered. The matter of the trap itself remains unresolved. Someone set that trap deliberately, intending to harm or kill a shifter, possibly the Crown Prince specifically. This council recommends a full investigation into rogue activities and potential assassination plots. Commander Lyra, you will lead this investigation with full authority to question anyone necessary. Lyra bowed. Yes, my lord. This session is concluded. We reconvene tomorrow morning to discuss trade agreements. The nobles began filing out, some casting sympathetic looks at Eileen, others still clearly suspicious. Lady Selene stormed past without a glance, her fury palpable. Darius descended from his tier and approached Eileen, who was still sitting with Ash in her lap trying to process what had just happened. You did well, he said quietly, offering his hand. Eileen took it and let him pull her to her feet. Ash jumped down and immediately pressed against both of their legs, as if trying to keep them together. I thought they'd convict me. 77 of them wanted to. But truth has a weight to it that lies don't. People can sense it, even when they don't want to. His hand tightened on hers. Come, you need to eat something and rest. Tomorrow's ceremony will be exhausting in an entirely different way. They walked through the corridors, Ash trotting between them. Nobles who passed bowed to Darius, and several nodded respectfully to Eileen, a marked change from 3 days ago. What happens now? Eileen asked. With the investigation? Lyra will track down whoever set that trap. If it was random, just a poacher with bad timing, we deal with them quietly. If it was an assassination attempt, his jaw tightened, then we have a traitor somewhere in the territories, and that's a much bigger problem. Do you think it was assassination? I think my mate died 6 months ago in a rogue attack that shouldn't have succeeded. I think my son was caught in a trap deep in forbidden territory where noble cubs shouldn't be able to wander. And I think someone out there wants my bloodline gone. His gold eyes met hers. But I also think they underestimated you. And that might be the mistake that brings them down. They reached her quarters. Darius paused at the door, his expression troubled. What? Eileen asked. Lady Helena spoke to me after the vote. She wants to formally sponsor you, claim you as Ashford family under the old treaties. It would give you legal protections, the right to use the Ashford name, and connections throughout the territories. Why would she do that? Because you're her cousin's daughter. And she feels guilty for abandoning you. And because having an Ashford in the palace strengthens her family's position. He smiled slightly. Politics is never just one thing. People can have good intentions and ulterior motives simultaneously. Should I accept? That's your choice. But it would make things easier for you here. The Ashfords carry weight not enough to threaten the throne, but enough to make people think twice about attacking you. He hesitated. And it would make you less of an outsider. More permanent. The word hung between them, loaded with implications Eileen wasn't ready to examine. I'll think about it, she said finally. Good. Darius reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture that was becoming familiar. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Ash is healing because of you, and I. He trailed off, something complicated crossing his face. I'm healing too, in ways I didn't expect. Before Eileen could respond, he turned and left, leaving her standing in the doorway with a wolf cub and a heart that suddenly felt too full for her chest. Inside, she found Petra had left a dinner tray and drawn a bath, but Eileen ignored both, collapsing onto her bed with Ash curled against her side. The day's emotional toll was catching up to her, exhaustion dragging at her bones. We survived, she whispered to Ash. He huffed softly, as if to say, of course we did. Together. And as Eileen's eyes closed, she realized something that should have terrified her but somehow didn't. She was beginning to belong here. To this place. to this pack, to this impossible new life. The question was whether belonging would save her or destroy her when the real danger finally showed its face. Chapter 7. The Honor and the Threat. The court ceremony began at dawn, when the first rays of sunlight painted the great hall in shades of gold and amber. Eileen stood in her quarters, staring at the formal gown Petra had laid out, deep silver silk that shimmered like moonlight on water, embroidered with patterns of wolves running through forests. It was more elaborate than anything she'd worn before, clearly designed to mark this as a significant occasion. His Majesty commissioned it specially, Petra said, fastening the last button at Eileen's back. He said you saved the future of his bloodline. The least he could do was ensure you looked the part when he honored you publicly. I'm not sure I want to be honored publicly, Eileen admitted. The council testimony was bad enough. Too late for cold feet now. Petra adjusted the silver circlet that sat on Eileen's braided hair, not a crown, but close enough to make a statement. Besides, you earned this. Let them see what real courage looks like. Ash was already dressed in his own formal attire, a small silver collar engraved with the royal crest. He sat by the door, tail wagging impatiently, clearly eager to get the ceremony over with, so he could return to more important activities like chasing rabbits in the garden. Captain Rowan arrived to escort them. He wore full military regalia, his auburn hair neatly combed, and he smiled when he saw Eileen. You clean up well, Lady Eileen. I'm not actually a lady, Eileen protested. That was just Darius being generous. Actually, about that. Rowan's smile widened. Lady Helena filed the sponsorship papers last night. As of this morning, you are officially Eileen Catherine Ashford Thorne, recognized member of House Ashford under the old treaties. So yes, you are actually a lady now. Eileen's stomach dropped. I didn't agree. She said you needed time to think, but the paperwork needed to be filed immediately to be legally binding before the ceremony. Something about closing loopholes that Lady Selene might exploit. Rowan's expression turned sympathetic. Helena's a bit ruthless when she wants to be, but she means well. So now Eileen was nobility. Officially. With all the protections and expectations that entailed, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The great hall was packed even more densely than it had been for the feast. Every noble attending the autumn council had turned out to witness the ceremony, along with palace staff, military officers, and what seemed like half the capital city. They lined the walls, filled the galleries, crowded into every available space. A path had been cleared through the center, leading to a raised platform where Darius waited in full royal regalia. He wore black leather embossed with silver, the crown of the northern packs gleaming on his dark hair, and a ceremonial sword at his hip. He looked every inch the warrior king, powerful, dangerous, and absolutely commanding. His eyes found Eileen's across the room, and something warm flickered in their gold depths. The herald's voice rang out, Lady Eileen Catherine Ashford Thorne, savior of Crown Prince Ash. Eileen walked forward, Ash limping proudly at her side. The crowd's murmurs washed over her, some approving, others still skeptical. She kept her eyes on Darius, using his steady presence as an anchor. When she reached the platform, she curtsied as Master Benedict had taught her. Ash sat at her feet, looking up at his father with obvious adoration. Lady Eileen, Darius said, his voice carrying through the hall. 3 weeks ago, you entered the Thornwood on a fool's errand and emerged a hero. You faced rogues with nothing but courage and a broken branch. You freed my son from a trap designed to kill. You asked for no reward, expected no recognition, and wanted nothing more than to ensure a child's safety. He descended from the platform, standing before her now, close enough that she could see the emotion carefully controlled behind his formal mask. Such selflessness deserves more than words, he continued. By my authority as Alpha King of the Northern Pax, I grant you the Silver Star of Valor, the highest civilian honor our people can bestow. You are recognized as a friend to the crown, a protector of the realm, and a member of this pack in truth as well as law. He lifted a silver medallion from a velvet cushion held by Commander Lyra. The medal was exquisite, a star with 8 points, each tip set with a small diamond, hanging from a silver chain. He placed it around Eileen's neck, his fingers brushing her skin, and sending unexpected warmth through her. Wear it with pride, he said quietly for her ears alone. You earned it. Then, louder. Furthermore, I grant you permanent residence in the Northern Palace, a monthly stipend for life, and access to all resources necessary for your continued education and development. You will want for nothing as long as you remain under my protection." The crowd erupted into applause, genuine this time, not the polite acknowledgement from the feast. Even nobles who'd voted against her in the council seemed moved by the ceremony's gravity. Eileen touched the medallion, feeling its weight settle against her chest. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay," Darius murmured. "Say you won't disappear the moment Ash doesn't need you anymore." Before Eileen could respond, Ash barked once, loud and insistent. The crowd laughed as the young prince stood on his hind legs, placing his front paws on Eileen's skirt and looking up at her with those intelligent gold eyes. "I think someone else wants to honor you," Darius said, amusement warming his voice. Ash made a complex series of sounds, half whine, half bark, that Eileen had learned meant he was trying to communicate something important. He tugged at her skirt, then limped over to a corner of the platform where a small cushion had been placed. On the cushion sat a tiny circlet, child-sized, made of woven silver wire. He had Healer Mira help him make it, Darius explained, his voice thick with emotion. "Spent 3 days working on it, wouldn't let anyone see until it was perfect. He wanted to give you something too." Eileen knelt down, ignoring the formal gown, and let Ash place the small circlet in her hands. It was rough, clearly made by paws that couldn't quite manage delicate work, but every weave showed care and determination. A child's gift, precious beyond measure. "It's beautiful," Eileen whispered, tears burning behind her eyes. "Thank you, Ash." The cub licked her face, his tail wagging so hard his whole body wiggled. Then he did something Eileen had never seen before. He threw back his head and howled a high, pure sound that spoke of joy and belonging and pack. The sound reverberated through the hall, and one by one, the shifters in the crowd answered. Commander Lyra howled first, her voice strong and clear. Then Captain Rowan, Baron Aldrich, Lady Helena. Even Darius joined in, his howl deep and resonant, and somehow heartbreaking. The humans in the crowd watched in awed silence, as the pack welcomed one of their own. When the howling finally faded, there wasn't a dry eye in the hall. The celebration feast that followed was lavish even by palace standards. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh breads, honeyed fruits, and desserts that looked like edible art. Wine flowed freely, musicians played in the corners, and the atmosphere was one of genuine festivity. Eileen sat at the high table again, this time with the silver star gleaming at her throat and Ash's rough little circlet tucked safely in her pocket. Nobles approached throughout the evening to offer congratulations, some sincere, others clearly trying to curry favor now that she'd been officially honored. "You've become quite the political figure," Lady Helena observed, settling into the chair beside Eileen. "Every family with unmarried sons is suddenly very interested in the newest member of House Ashford." "I'm not interested in marriage," Eileen said firmly. "Of course not. You're too busy raising the future king and capturing the attention of the current one." Helena's eyes sparkled with knowing amusement. "Don't look so shocked, child. I've been navigating palace politics for 60 years. I know what interested looks like." Heat crept up Eileen's neck. "Darius is just grateful. I saved his son." We'll see." Helena patted her hand. "Either way, you've done well. The Silver Star puts you on equal social footing with most of the nobility here. Combined with the Ashford name, you're actually quite a catch now." "I don't want to be a catch. I just want to help Ash heal. And that, my dear, is exactly why you're worth catching." Helena rose gracefully. "Enjoy your evening. You've earned it." The feast continued late into the night. Eileen danced once with Captain Rowan, who was surprisingly graceful despite his military bearing, and once with Baron Aldrich, who spent the entire dance telling her about his grandchildren. Darius watched from the high table, occasionally handling administrative matters but mostly just watching her. It should have felt uncomfortable. Instead, it felt safe. Near midnight, Eileen slipped away to the gardens for fresh air. The autumn night was cool but not cold, the sky clear enough to see stars scattered like diamonds across black velvet. She found a bench near a fountain and sat, finally allowing herself to process everything that had happened. A month ago, she'd been scrubbing butchers' floors and surviving Margot's cruelty. Now she was nobility, honored by a king, wearing medals and attending feasts. It felt like someone else's life, like she'd stepped into a story meant for a different girl. You're spiraling again. Darius's voice came from the shadows, and then he was there, settling onto the bench beside her. He'd removed his crown, and without it he looked younger, less burdened. I can see it in your face. I'm processing, Eileen corrected. There's a difference. Is there? He stretched his long legs out, tilting his head back to look at the stars. What are you processing? How strange this all is. A month ago, I was nobody. Now I'm. She gestured helplessly at the medallion, the dress, the palace around them. This. You were never nobody, Darius said quietly. You just lived in a place that couldn't see your worth. That's their failure. Not yours. You keep saying things like that, because they're true. He looked at her now, those gold eyes intense in the moonlight. Do you regret it? Staying? No, Eileen said, surprised by how much she meant it. It's terrifying and overwhelming, and I have no idea what I'm doing half the time. But no, I don't regret it. Good. His hand found hers on the bench between them, warm and calloused and steady. Because I'd regret losing you. Both of us would. The admission hung in the air, weighted with implications Eileen wasn't ready to examine. She knew she should pull her hand away, should maintain proper distance between a king and his son's companion, but she didn't want to. For the first time in her life, she wanted to be close to someone, to belong to something real. Darius, she said carefully. What happens when Ash doesn't need me anymore, when he's healed and I've fulfilled my purpose? Then you choose what comes next. His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. Stay, leave, travel, study whatever you want. The stipend is for life, not conditional on Ash's need. You're free, Eileen. Truly free. Maybe for the first time ever. Freedom. The word should have been comforting. Instead, it felt terrifying, because freedom meant choice, and choice meant risk, and risk meant the possibility of losing this whatever this was becoming. I don't know how to be free, Eileen admitted. I've spent my whole life surviving. I don't know how to just live. Then we'll figure it out together. Darius squeezed her hand. You've been teaching Ash how to heal. Maybe he can teach you how to live without fear. Before Eileen could respond, a commotion erupted from inside the palace. Raised voices, running footsteps, the sharp bark of military commands. Darius was on his feet instantly, all traces of softness vanishing. Stay here. Like hell, Eileen said, following him. They ran back into the palace to find Commander Lyra in the main corridor, her face grim, surrounded by guards. She held a piece of parchment that looked like it had been torn from something larger. What happened? Darius demanded. This was left in the Crown Prince's nursery. Lyra handed him the parchment. Nailed to his pillow with a silver dagger. Eileen's blood ran cold. She moved closer to read over Darius's shoulder. The message was written in blood, old blood, brown, and flaking in handwriting that looked deliberately crude. The cub should have died. The human protector won't save him next time. 7 packs will fall, 1 crown will break, and the blood of kings will water the thornwood. This is only the beginning. Below the words was a symbol, a wolf's head split down the middle, half black and half white. Darius's face went deadly calm, the kind of calm that preceded violence. Seal the palace. No one in or out until we've searched every room. Double the guard on Ash and Eileen. And find me everyone who had access to the nursery tonight. Already done, Your Majesty, Lyra said. The symbol, Eileen said, her voice shaking. What does it mean? It's the mark of the divided pack, Darius said, his voice flat. Extremists who believe shifters and humans should never mix, that the peace between our species is weakness that must be purged. They were eradicated 20 years ago in the cleansing wars, or so we thought. They're back, Lyra said grimly. And they're targeting the royal family. Darius looked at Eileen, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw real fear in his eyes, not for himself, for his son, for her. This changes everything, he said. The council will demand action. War, probably. And you. He touched her face gently. You've just become the most visible symbol of everything the divided pack hates. Human and shifter working together, breaking their twisted ideology just by existing. Then they'll come for me too, Eileen said, understanding dawning. Yes. Darius's jaw tightened. Which means I can't let you out of my sight until we've destroyed every last one of them. Your Majesty. A guard called from down the corridor. We found something else. In Lady Eileen's quarters. They ran to her rooms. The door stood open, guards flanking it. Inside, her desk had been overturned, her books scattered, and on the wall above her bed, written in the same brown blood, was a single word: traitor. Ash stood in the center of the destruction, hackles raised, growling at shadows. The moment he saw Eileen, he rushed to her, whimpering. Eileen scooped him up, holding him tight, her mind reeling. Someone had been in her room, had touched her things, had threatened not just Ash, but her. Pack your essentials, Darius said, his voice leaving no room for argument. You're moving to the royal wing, into the suite adjacent to mine. If they want to get to you, they'll have to go through me first. Darius, I can't. You can and you will. He turned to face her fully, and his expression was fierce. I've lost enough, Eileen. I won't lose you too. Not to extremists, not to politics, not to your own stubborn independence. You are Pack. You are under my protection, and I protect what's mine. The possessiveness in his tone should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel safer than she had in years. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Within an hour, she'd been moved to rooms that were twice the size of her previous quarters, connected to Darius's chambers by a door that could be locked from both sides but was currently standing open. Guards were posted at every entrance. Ash refused to leave her side. And eventually Darius gave up trying to separate them. As midnight turned to early morning, Eileen stood at her new window, looking out at the thornwood. Somewhere in that darkness, people wanted her dead, wanted Ash dead, wanted to tear down everything she'd started to build. But she'd survived Margot's cruelty for 8 years. She'd fought rogues with a stick. She'd stood before a hostile council and defended herself with nothing but truth. She could survive this too. She had to. Because somewhere in these chambers, a king was sitting by his son's bed, watching over him with eyes that held too much loss. And Eileen was beginning to realize that protecting Ash meant something more than just keeping him safe. It meant giving Darius a reason to hope again. And that, she decided, was worth fighting for. Chapter 8. The mission no one should accept. The palace transformed overnight from a place of celebration to a fortress under siege. Eileen woke to the sound of boots marching through corridors, orders being shouted, and the unmistakable tension of a military mobilization. She'd barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the windows had sent her jolting awake, certain the divided pack had come for her. Ash had sensed her fear. He'd crawled into her bed sometime before dawn and pressed his warm body against hers, his steady breathing eventually lulling her into a few hours of fitful rest. Now, as gray morning light filtered through the windows, Petra arrived with breakfast and news. Commander Lyra's called an emergency war council, the girl said, setting down a tray laden with food Eileen had no appetite for. Every military leader from all 7 territories. They're saying this could turn into a full conflict if the divided pack has the support people think they do. What kind of support? Eileen asked, forcing herself to eat despite her churning stomach. Rumor is, they've been recruiting for years slowly, carefully from the extremist fringes, rogues who hate the peace treaties, nobles who think humans are inferior, common folk who blame shifters for everything wrong in their lives. Petra's voice dropped to a whisper. They're saying the pack could have thousands of members across all the territories. Thousands. Eileen's hand stilled on her fork. How did you fight thousands of people who wanted you dead? A knock at the connecting door made her jump. Darius entered without waiting for permission, his face drawn with exhaustion. He wore battle leathers instead of formal attire, and his hair was disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. You need to see this, he said without preamble. He led her through his chambers. She caught only a glimpse of a massive bed and walls lined with maps before they were moving again into a war room she hadn't known existed. The space was dominated by a table carved from a single piece of wood, its surface covered with maps marked with colored pins and hastily scrawled notes. Commander Lyra stood at the head of the table, flanked by Captain Rowan and 2 other military officers Eileen didn't recognize. Lady Helena was there too, looking grim. They all turned when Eileen entered. Lady Eileen, Lyra said, we need your help. My help? I'm not a soldier. I don't know anything about military strategy. No. But you know Thornhaven. And that's where the trail leads. Lyra pointed to a cluster of red pins on the map near the southern border. We've been investigating the trap that caught Prince Ash. The iron used to make it was forged in a specific way, a technique used primarily in the southern marches. When we traced the metal's origin, we found it came from a smithy in Thornhaven. Eileen's stomach dropped. Thornhaven? Are you sure? Positive. The smith's name is Garrett Blackwood. He claims he sold that particular batch of iron to a traveling merchant 3 months ago. A merchant named Thomas Thorne. The world tilted sideways. No. My father wouldn't, he couldn't. We don't think he knew what it would be used for, Darius said quickly, moving to her side. But someone used your father's merchant routes to move materials for the divided pack, which means either he's involved, or someone close to him is. Margot. The name blazed through Eileen's mind like wildfire. Margot, who'd sent her into the Thornwood, knowing the dangers. Margot, who'd wanted her dead for 8 years. Margot, who'd have access to Thomas's merchant contacts and inventory. My stepmother, Eileen breathed. It has to be her. That's our theory too, Lyra said. But we need proof. And we need to know how deep this goes. Is she just a sympathizer who helped with supplies, or is she actively working with the divided pack? How do we find out? Eileen asked. We send someone to Thornhaven. Someone she won't suspect. Someone who can get close enough to search her belongings, overhear her conversations, find evidence. Lyra's pale eyes fixed on Eileen. We send you. Absolutely not, Darius said immediately. That's suicide. If Margot is working with the divided pack, sending Eileen back is like serving her to them on a silver platter. Which is exactly why it will work, Lyra countered. They'll think she's running home in fear after last night's threats. They won't expect her to be investigating them. And with the right backup soldiers disguised as merchants, maybe we can keep her safe while she gathers intelligence. No, Darius repeated, his voice flat with authority. I won't risk her. Your Majesty, with respect, we need this information. If the divided pack has infiltrated the merchant networks, they could be moving weapons and supplies across all the territories. We need to know their reach before we can strike. Lyra's expression was sympathetic but unyielding. And Lady Eileen is our best chance of getting inside Thornhaven, without alerting them. Then send spies, send soldiers, send anyone but her. They'll be recognized as outsiders. Thornhaven is a small village, everyone knows everyone, but Eileen? Lyra gestured at her. She's the stepdaughter who ran away and is now coming back, tail between her legs, maybe to reconcile with her family. Margot will gloat. She'll let her guard down. And that's when we get what we need. The logic was sound, Eileen realized with growing dread. It was also terrifying. How long would I be there? She asked. Eileen. No. Darius started. How long? She repeated, looking at Lyra. 3 days, maybe 4. Just long enough to search the house, observe Margot's contacts, and find documentary evidence if it exists. Lyra's voice softened. I won't lie, it's dangerous. But you'd have protection. Captain Rowan will accompany you as your guard, along with 2 others in disguise. If anything goes wrong, they'll extract you immediately. And if I find proof, what happens to my father? That depends on his level of involvement, Lady Helena said quietly. If he was an unwitting accomplice, he'll face penalties but not execution. If he knowingly aided the divided pack. She trailed off meaningfully. Eileen closed her eyes. Her father, who'd failed to protect her from Margot, who'd chosen ignorance over difficult truths, who'd written that letter full of guilt and promises. Did she owe him loyalty? Or did she owe the truth to the people who'd actually protected her? I'll do it, she said. Eileen. Darius's hand closed around her arm. Not roughly but firmly. Can I speak with you? Alone? They stepped into an antechamber, leaving the others to continue planning. The moment the door closed, Darius turned to face her, his expression a storm of anger and fear. This is insane, he said. You realize that, right? You'll be walking into the home of a woman who tried to kill you, who's potentially working with extremists who want you dead, and you'll be pretending everything is fine while you search for evidence. One wrong move, and you're dead. I know. Then why would you agree to this? Because someone needs to. Eileen's voice rose, frustration breaking through her fear. Because the divided pack threatened Ash. Threatened me. Threatened everything you've built here. And if my stepmother is helping them, if my father is somehow involved, then I'm the only one who can get close enough to find out without starting a war. We can find another way. Can we? How long will that take? How many more threats will arrive while we're investigating? How many people will die? She stepped closer, forcing him to meet her eyes. You said I was pack. You said you protect what's yours. Well, pack protects each other. Let me do this. Let me help. Darius's jaw worked, emotions warring across his face. You're asking me to send you into danger. After I just got you to safety. I'm asking you to trust me. To believe I'm strong enough to do this. Eileen's voice softened. You believed I was strong enough to save Ash. Believe I'm strong enough to save myself. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then he pulled her into his arms, the embrace fierce and desperate. Eileen stiffened in surprise. They'd barely touched beyond formal gestures, but then she relaxed, letting herself be held. If anything happens to you, Darius murmured against her hair, I will raze Thornhaven to the ground. Do you understand? I will destroy everything and everyone who had a hand in it. Nothing will happen to me. I have Captain Rowan, remember? And I'm harder to kill than I look. He pulled back just enough to see her face, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. You're also more important than you realize. To Ash. To this pack. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. To me. The admission hung between them, weighted with everything they hadn't said. Eileen's breath caught, her heart hammering against her ribs. Darius. Don't, he said quickly. Don't say anything now. Just, come back. Promise me you'll come back. I promise, Eileen whispered. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his breathing unsteady. They stood like that for a long moment, not quite kissing, but closer than they'd ever been, sharing breath and fear, and something that felt dangerously like hope. Then he released her and stepped back, becoming the king again. We prepare. You leave tomorrow at dawn. That gives us time to brief you on what to look for, teach you basic counter-interrogation techniques, and establish communication protocols. Tomorrow? Eileen's stomach twisted. That's so soon. The longer we wait, the more time the divided pack has to move resources or cover their tracks. We strike fast. He opened the door, his expression now carefully neutral. Lyra, she's agreed. Begin preparations. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of activity. Commander Lyra drilled Eileen on observational techniques, how to search a room without leaving obvious traces, how to memorize documents quickly, how to recognize coded language. Captain Rowan taught her basic self-defense moves, emphasizing escape over engagement. Your job isn't to fight, he explained, guiding her through a simple wrist release. Your job is to survive long enough for us to reach you. Remember, loud, fast, and run like hell. Master Benedict gave her a crash course in recognizing treasonous materials, symbols, phrases, organizational structures, common to extremist groups. Lady Helena provided a list of Ashford family contacts in the southern marches, who could offer sanctuary if things went catastrophically wrong. Through it all, Ash stayed close, his anxiety palpable. He'd figured out something was wrong, that Eileen was preparing for danger, and he didn't like it one bit. That evening, when she tried to put him to bed in the nursery, he refused to leave her side. He knows you're leaving, Healer Mira said gently. Shifter children are remarkably perceptive about these things. Eileen knelt down and hugged Ash close. I have to go away for a few days, she told him, knowing he couldn't understand the words, but hoping he'd understand the tone. But I promise I'm coming back. I will always come back to you. Ash whined and licked her face, then did something that broke her heart. He carefully pulled the rough little circlet he'd made from her pocket. She'd been carrying it everywhere, and placed it on her head. For protection, Darius said from the doorway, his voice thick. He's giving you pack luck. Eileen's eyes burned with tears. She adjusted the circlet so it sat properly, then touched Ash's soft fur. I'll keep it with me every moment. I promise. That night, She couldn't sleep despite exhaustion. She lay in her new bed, staring at the ceiling, running through everything she'd learned. Search techniques, escape routes, the location of Ashford's safe houses. A soft knock at the connecting door made her sit up. "Come in." Darius entered, still dressed, looking as sleepless as she felt. "I thought you might be awake. Too much in my head." Eileen shifted over, and without discussing it, Darius sat on the edge of her bed. "Are you here to try to talk me out of it again?" "No. You've made your choice. I'm here because—" He paused, searching for words. "Because I need you to know something before you leave. Just in case. In case I don't come back, you mean? Don't say that." His hand found hers in the darkness. "But yes. In case something goes wrong and I never get another chance." Eileen's heart began to pound. "What do you need to tell me?" "That you've changed everything. For me. For Ash. For this entire pack." His grip tightened. 6 months ago, I was drowning. The war took my mate. Ash was broken with grief. I was ruling by obligation and waiting to feel something other than empty. Then you appeared, and suddenly there was light again. Hope. The possibility that we could be more than just survivors. "Darius, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know there's an imbalance between us, king and subject, employer and employee, everything that makes this complicated. But I needed you to know that you matter. Not just as Ash's companion or the woman who saved him. You matter to me. As yourself. As Eileen." Tears slipped down Eileen's cheeks. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever seen her as valuable simply for existing. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Of going back there. Of facing Margot. Of discovering my father really is involved. Of failing you and Ash." "You won't fail." Darius raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. A gesture so tender it stole her breath. "You're the strongest person I know. And you're not alone. Remember that. Whatever happens in Thornhaven, you're not alone anymore." He stayed with her until she finally fell asleep, his hand still holding hers, his presence a shield against the nightmares waiting in the darkness. When she woke at dawn, he was gone, but on her nightstand was a small silver dagger in a leather sheath, with a note in his bold handwriting. "For protection. Use it if you must. Come home safe. We're waiting. D." Eileen strapped the dagger to her thigh beneath her travel dress, adjusted Ash's circlet in her pocket, and went to face whatever waited in Thornhaven. She'd survived Margot once before. She could do it again. She had to. Chapter 9. Confronting the monster who raised you. The journey to Thornhaven took 6 hours by carriage, 6 hours of Eileen's stomach twisting itself into knots while Captain Rowan tried to distract her with small talk. "You remember the signals?" he asked for the 3rd time. "Yes. If I'm in immediate danger, I light the red candle in my bedroom window. If I've found evidence, the white candle. If I need extraction but it's not urgent, I leave a mark on the well's edge." Eileen recited the protocols mechanically. "And you'll be staying at the inn, posing as merchants passing through. With Corporal Jenna and Private Tavin as my associates, we'll be watching the house in shifts. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you signal us." Rowan's brown eyes were serious. "I mean it, Eileen. Don't try to be a hero. Your job is intelligence gathering, not confrontation." "I know, but knowing and doing were different things. Especially when the carriage crested the final hill and Thornhaven came into view. The village looked exactly as she'd left it a month ago, small stone buildings clustered around a central square. The butcher's shop where she'd spent so many miserable hours, the fountain where children played. But now it all looked different, tainted by what she knew. Somewhere in this peaceful little village, people were working with extremists who wanted to destroy the peace between humans and shifters. Somewhere in this village, her stepmother had sent her to die. The carriage stopped at the village edge as planned. Eileen would walk the rest of the way alone, a girl returning home in shame after her foolish attempt to make something of herself in the capital. Captain Rowan and his team would enter separately, arriving at the inn within the hour. "Remember," Rowan said as she climbed out. "You're not alone. We're right here." Eileen nodded, adjusted the small travel bag that held her few belongings, and started walking. People recognized her immediately. Old Grandmother Hess was at her bread stall and gasped audibly. Eileen? Child, is that you? Hello, grandmother. Eileen forced a trembling smile. I've come home. But we heard Margot said you died in the forest, killed by wolves. The old woman hurried forward, her weathered hands reaching for Eileen's face. Where have you been? It's a long story. Is my father home? He is. Poor man. He's been beside himself with grief. Oh, child, you should go to him immediately. Word spread through the village like wildfire. By the time Eileen reached her father's house, a small crowd had gathered, whispering and staring. She ignored them all, focusing on the familiar door that had once been the entrance to her prison. She knocked. Footsteps approached, and then the door swung open to reveal her father. Thomas Thorne looked like he'd aged 10 years in a month, his hair grayer, his face drawn, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion and grief. When he saw Eileen, he froze. Eileen? His voice cracked. Is it really? It's me, father. He pulled her into his arms so suddenly she nearly stumbled. He held her tight, his shoulders shaking, and Eileen realized he was crying. I thought you were dead. Margot said she told me you'd run away and the wolves, oh God, I thought I'd lost you. Guilt twisted in Eileen's chest. Whatever his failures, her father's grief was real. I'm sorry. I should have sent word sooner. Where have you been? What happened? Before Eileen could answer, another voice cut through the moment, cold and sharp as winter ice. Well, the prodigal daughter returns. Margot stood at the top of the stairs, dressed in a fine gown that must have cost more than Eileen's entire wardrobe. She was as beautiful as ever, golden hair perfectly arranged, figure enviable, face arranged in an expression of surprised delight that didn't reach her eyes. Eileen, what a relief to see you safe. We were so worried when you disappeared. Margot descended the stairs with practiced grace. Where on earth have you been? The Northern Territories, Eileen said, watching her stepmother carefully for any reaction. I was injured in the Thornwood and taken to the palace for healing. Margot's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in her eyes too fast to identify. The palace? How extraordinary. You must tell us everything. Thomas, don't leave her standing in the doorway. Come in, dear, come in. The house looked the same: polished floors, expensive furnishings that Margot had insisted on, the narrow stairs leading to what had been Eileen's tiny room. But now she saw it through different eyes. This wasn't a home. It was a cage dressed in silk. They settled in the sitting room, and Eileen told a carefully edited version of events, finding a wolf cub in a trap, being injured while freeing it, waking in the palace. She made no mention of the cub being the crown prince, of her new status as nobility, of the threats from the divided pack. How remarkable, Margot purred when Eileen finished. And they just let you come home? How generous of them. I wanted to see my father, to let him know I was safe. Thomas gripped her hand, his eyes still wet. Will you stay, please, Eileen? I know things were difficult before, but I've spoken to Margot. Things will be different now. You're my daughter, you belong here. I can stay for a few days, Eileen said carefully. But I have obligations in the capital. I've been offered work there. Not entirely a lie, she did have obligations. Just not the kind her father imagined. Work? What kind of work? Margot's tone was casual, but her eyes were sharp. Tutoring, teaching children to read. The lie came easily. Master Benedict had helped her prepare it. The palace staff need educated tutors for their children, and I've been learning under a master scholar. How ambitious. Margot's smile was razor thin. And here I thought you'd return begging for your old room back. Margot, Thomas said sharply, that's enough. I'm only saying what we all thought. But Margot stood gracefully. I should see about dinner. Vivienne will be thrilled to see you, Eileen. She's been helping at the dress shop today, but she'll be home soon. She swept out, leaving Eileen alone with her father. I'm sorry, Thomas said immediately. For everything. For not seeing what was happening. For not protecting you. His hands trembled. I got your letter, the one the king sent. He told me everything Margot had done. I confronted her. But she denied it all. Said you were exaggerating, that I was choosing you over her. He looked up, his eyes pleading. I chose you, Eileen. I told her if she ever hurt you again, I'd divorce her. I swear I'll protect you this time. The sincerity in his voice was painful. He meant it now, with evidence staring him in the face. But where had this conviction been for the past 8 years? "Thank you, Father," Eileen said. Because what else could she say? That evening was surreal. Vivienne returned home and reacted with theatrical surprise at Eileen's presence, though her eyes held calculation rather than joy. Dinner was tense, with Margot playing the gracious hostess while making subtle jabs about Eileen's adventure and how worried they'd all been. "Did you meet anyone interesting at the palace?" Vivienne asked innocently. "Any young men?" "A few," Eileen said vaguely. "But I was mostly focused on my studies." "How dull." Vivienne pouted. "I would have attended every ball, danced with every soldier." "Wasted on you, really." "Vivienne," Thomas chided, but without real heat. After dinner, Eileen retreated to her old room, the tiny closet she'd once called home. Someone had cleaned it, put fresh linens on the narrow bed, even placed flowers on the windowsill. Margot's work, probably. A show of care for Thomas's benefit. Eileen waited until the house fell silent, then began her search. She started with her own room, checking for anything Margot might have hidden here. Nothing. Then she crept into the hallway, her heart pounding, and listened. Soft breathing from her father's room, lighter sounds from Vivienne's. Margot's room was at the end of the hall, the largest bedroom, the one that had been her mother's. Eileen tried the door. Locked, of course. She pulled out a thin piece of wire Captain Rowan had given her, just in case, and worked at the lock, the way he'd taught her. It took 3 agonizing minutes. But finally the mechanism clicked. The room was lavish silk bedding, expensive furniture, a wardrobe full of gowns. Eileen moved quickly but carefully, searching drawers, checking under the mattress, examining the wardrobe's false bottom that she'd discovered years ago while cleaning. Nothing. 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 Then her hand brushed against something hard, tucked behind a loose board in the wardrobe's back panel. She pried it free and found a leather-bound journal. Her hands shook as she opened it. The entries were coded dates and numbers that meant nothing at first glance. But Master Benedict had taught her to look for patterns, and these patterns were familiar. Shipment records, quantities, destinations, payments, and scattered throughout, a symbol she now recognized. The split wolf's head of the divided pack. Margot wasn't just a sympathizer. She was actively involved, using Thomas's merchant contacts to ship supplies, coordinating with other cells, reporting on palace activities she'd learned about from village gossip. And there, in an entry from 3 months ago, trap acquired. Iron from T's shipment. Will deploy in Thornwood next week. Target, royal spawn. Message will be clear. Royal spawn. They'd meant to kill Ash. And Margot had known. Had helped make it happen. Eileen's vision blurred with rage. Her stepmother hadn't just sent her into the forest hoping she'd die. She'd sent her there knowing there was a trap, knowing rogues were working with the divided pack in that area. She'd hoped Eileen would either die or be blamed for whatever happened to any shifter who stumbled into it. It was supposed to be a win-win for Margot. Either Eileen died, or she was executed for treason. Instead, Eileen had saved the crown prince and ruined everything. A floorboard creaked behind her. Eileen spun to find Margot standing in the doorway, a candelabra in one hand and murder in her eyes. "You always were a nosy little rat," Margot said softly. "I should have killed you years ago." Eileen's hand went to the dagger strapped to her thigh, but Margot was faster. She lunged forward, and they crashed into the wardrobe. The journal flew from Eileen's hands, skittering across the floor. "You stupid girl," Margot hissed, her hands closing around Eileen's throat. "You were supposed to die in that forest. Instead, you saved that beast's whelp and ruined everything. Do you have any idea how long we've been planning this? How carefully we've built our network?" Eileen clawed at Margot's hands, gasping for air. Her vision was starting to blur, dark spots dancing at the edges. The dagger. She needed the dagger. She stopped fighting Margot's hands, and instead grabbed for her thigh. Her fingers closed around the leather sheath, yanked the blade free, and drove it upward. Margot screamed and released her, stumbling back. The blade had caught her shoulder, not a killing blow, but enough to disable her grip. Eileen scrambled away, gasping, her throat on fire. She grabbed the journal from the floor and ran for the window. Second floor, but there was a trellis. She could climb down, run for the inn, signal Captain Rowan. The door burst open. Thomas stood there, awakened by the noise, his eyes wild. He took in the scene, Margot bleeding, Eileen with the dagger, the open journal in her hands. Eileen? What? She's with the divided pack, father. Eileen choked out. She tried to have the crown prince killed. She sent me into the forest hoping I'd die. It's all in the journal, evidence of treason. Lies, Margot shrieked. Thomas, she attacked me. She's been corrupted by those beasts in the palace, and now she's trying to destroy our family. Thomas looked between them, confusion and horror warring on his face. Father, please. Eileen begged. Read the journal. See for yourself. But before he could respond, Margot pulled something from her pocket, a whistle. She blew it once, twice, 3 times. The sound was piercing, unnatural. And within seconds, Eileen heard what it had summoned. Footsteps. Multiple footsteps, running toward the house from outside. You brought others, Eileen whispered. How many? Enough. Margot smiled through her pain, blood soaking her shoulder. Did you really think you were so clever? Coming back here alone, thinking you could expose us? We've been watching the palace for weeks. We knew you'd come eventually. The footsteps were getting closer. Eileen looked at the window, her only escape route, and made her choice. She ran. She hit the window at full speed, crashing through the glass and grabbing for the trellis. Her hands caught wood, slipped, caught again. She scrambled down as fast as she could, ignoring the splinters and the cuts from the broken glass. She hit the ground and ran toward the village square, toward the inn where Captain Rowan was stationed. Behind her, she heard Margot shouting orders, heard more footsteps pursuing. Captain Rowan, she screamed as she burst into the square. Rowan, help! The inn door flew open, and Rowan emerged with his sword drawn. Behind him came Corporal Jenna and Private Tavin, both armed and ready. How many? Rowan demanded, moving to shield Eileen. At least 6, maybe more. Margot's with them. She's divided pack, I have the evidence. Eileen thrust the journal at him. She tried to kill me. Figures emerged from the shadows around the square, rough-looking men and women with weapons drawn. But they stopped when they saw the soldiers, clearly not expecting military presence. Stand down, Rowan called out, his voice carrying authority. By order of King Darius of the Northern Pax, you are all under arrest for conspiracy and treason. We don't answer to that beast lover, one of the men spat, and neither should any true human. Then you'll answer to my blade, Rowan said calmly. Your choice. For a heartbeat, the square was frozen in tension. Then one of the conspirators lunged, and chaos erupted. Rowan's team moved with practiced efficiency, engaging the attackers while Eileen pressed herself against the inn wall, clutching the journal like a lifeline. She saw flashes of combat steel clashing, bodies moving with deadly grace. Rowan disarmed one attacker while Jenna took down 2 others with brutal efficiency. But there were too many. For every one they subdued, 2 more seemed to appear from the darkness. Then a howl split the night long, resonant, and unmistakably alpha. Darius. He emerged from the forest edge in his wolf form, massive and silver-black, his eyes burning gold in the darkness. Behind him came a pack of shifters, all in wolf form, all moving with predatory grace. The conspirators took one look at the Alpha King and ran. But they didn't get far. The pack hunted them down with terrifying efficiency, subduing rather than killing but leaving no doubt about their capability for violence. Darius shifted back to human form as he reached Eileen, not caring that he was naked, that the entire village was watching. He pulled her into his arms, his hands running over her, checking for injuries. You're hurt, he said, his voice rough with emotion. He touched the cuts on her arms from the window glass, the bruises forming on her throat. She hurt you. I'm okay, Eileen managed. I got the evidence. It's all here. Margot's involvement, the supply network, everything. I know. I heard. He cupped her face gently. You were supposed to signal if you were in danger. I tried. She moved too fast. Eileen's legs gave out. Adrenaline crash hitting her all at once. Darius caught her, lifting her easily. How did you know to come? I didn't trust the plan. I followed at a distance with my personal guard. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. I couldn't let you face this alone. Not really. Commander Lyra appeared, now in human form and carrying clothes for Darius. Your Majesty, we've captured 11 conspirators, including Margot Thorne. Thomas Thorne is in the house. Appears to be in shock but cooperative. The journal contains enough evidence to prosecute not just the Thornhaven cell but multiple others across the territories. Good. Darius pulled on pants without releasing Eileen. Arrest them all. I want every name in that journal brought in for questioning. What about Thomas? Eileen asked quietly. That's your decision, Darius said. The journal will tell us if he was involved. If not, he's guilty of nothing but willful blindness. What do you want me to do with him? Eileen thought about her father, weak, absent, but genuinely grieving. He'd been used by Margot, just like she had. The difference was he'd had the power to stop it and hadn't. Question him. If he's innocent, let him go. But I don't want to see him again. Her voice was steady despite the pain. He made his choices. Now he lives with them. So be it. They stayed in Thornhaven only long enough to secure the prisoners and evidence. Then Darius carried Eileen to his horse, mounted behind her, and rode toward the palace with his pack surrounding them like a living shield. Eileen leaned back against his chest, exhausted and hurting but alive. She'd done it. She'd gotten the evidence, survived Margot's attack, and struck a real blow against the divided pack. I'm proud of you, Darius murmured against her hair. Terrified, furious that you were hurt, but proud. You're stronger than I gave you credit for. I promised I'd come back, Eileen whispered. For you and Ash, I keep my promises. His arms tightened around her, and they rode toward home, toward safety, toward the wolf cub who would be so relieved to see her, toward whatever came next in this strange new life she'd claimed for herself. She'd faced her past and survived. Now she could finally start building a future. Chapter 10. From Ashes to Crown. The week following Thornhaven was chaos contained within palace walls. Interrogations ran day and night as Commander Lyra's team worked through the captured conspirators. Margot, facing execution for treason, finally broke on the third day and provided names, dozens of them, spread across all 7 territories. The divided pack was larger than anyone had feared, but also more fractured. Without central leadership, the cells operated independently, which made them dangerous but also vulnerable once exposed. Eileen testified before the council again, this time presenting the journal and recounting her confrontation with Margot. The nobles who doubted her before were silent now, their skepticism turned to grudging respect. Even Lady Selene had apologized stiffly, but genuinely for her earlier hostility. You've done the territories a great service, Lord Corvain said at the conclusion of her testimony. The divided pack has been a shadow threat for years. You've brought them into the light where we can destroy them. But it was the conversation with her father, conducted through written letters rather than face-to-face, that weighed most heavily on Eileen's heart. Eileen, the king's investigators have cleared me of direct involvement with the divided pack. I knew nothing of Margot's activities, though I accept that my ignorance was willful. I chose not to see what was happening in my own home to you, and to the world beyond my merchant roots. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm selling the business, leaving Thornhaven, and starting over somewhere I can't hurt anyone else with my cowardice. Vivian will stay with her mother's family in the Eastern Marches. You asked once why I never protected you from Margot. The truth is, I was afraid of losing her, of being alone, of facing what my weakness had cost my daughter. That fear made me complicit in your suffering. I'm glad you found somewhere you're valued. You always deserved better than what I gave you. Your father, Thomas. Eileen read the letter 3 times, then tucked it away in her desk drawer. Maybe someday she'd forgive him. Maybe not. Either way, that chapter of her life was closed. Now she had to figure out what the next chapter looked like. You're thinking too hard again, Darius observed. They were in his study, ostensibly reviewing security protocols but really just sitting together in comfortable silence while Ash napped on the rug between them. It had become their evening ritual over the past week, time to decompress from the day's intensity. I'm thinking about what happens next, Eileen admitted. The immediate threat is contained. Ash is healing, he barely limps anymore, and he started playing with the other cubs in the nursery. My job here is almost done. Your job was never just about Ash's physical recovery. Darius set down the report he'd been reading. It was about helping him heal from grief. That takes longer than a few weeks. He doesn't need me the way he did before. He's making friends. Sleeping through the night. Laughing again. Eileen smiled despite the ache in her chest. That's what we wanted, isn't it? For him to be whole again. And what about you? Darius asked quietly. Are you whole again? The question struck deeper than expected. Was she? A month ago, she'd been broken, beaten down by years of abuse. Expecting nothing from life but survival. Now she wore silver medallions and noble names, lived in a palace, and had people who genuinely cared about her well-being. But she was also adrift. Her purpose had been so clear. Help Ash heal. Now that he was healing, what was she supposed to do? Who was she supposed to be? I don't know, she admitted. I don't know who I am without someone to save or a crisis to navigate. Then maybe it's time to figure that out. Darius stood and moved to the window overlooking the gardens. Lady Helena suggested you might consider diplomatic training. The territories need people who understand both human and shifter cultures. You're uniquely positioned for that work. Diplomacy? Eileen blinked. I'm barely literate. I've only been studying for a month. And you've learned more in that month than most students learn in a year. Master Benedict says you have a gift for languages. You're already conversational in pack speech, which most humans never master. He glanced back at her. But if diplomacy doesn't interest you, there are other options. Healing, like your mother, scholarship. Even military strategy. Lyra says you have good instincts for reading people and situations. You've been planning my future, Eileen said. Not sure how she felt about that. I've been thinking about ways to keep you here. His voice was careful, controlled. Because the alternative, you leaving, is something I'm not ready to face. The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. Eileen rose and moved to stand beside him at the window. Below, Ash had woken and was playing with 3 other cubs, tumbling through the autumn leaves with the carefree joy of a child who'd finally learned to be a child again. Why? She asked softly. Why do you want me to stay? You could hire 100 tutors for Ash, 1,000 diplomats or healers or scholars. Why does it matter if I'm the one who stays? Darius was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he turned to face her fully, and the raw emotion in his gold eyes stole her breath. Because I'm falling in love with you, he said. And I don't know how to stop. The world seemed to tilt sideways. That's... Eileen's voice failed. You can't. I'm nobody. I'm just... Don't. He stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her face. Don't diminish yourself. Not here, not with me. You're the woman who fought rogues to save my son, who stood before the council and defended herself with nothing but truth, who walked back into her abuser's house because it was the right thing to do. His thumb traced her cheekbone. You're brave and clever and kind, and you make my son laugh again. You make me feel things I thought died with my mate. So no, you're not. Nobody. You're everything. Tears burned behind Eileen's eyes. I don't know how to do this. I've never, no one's ever. I know. His other hand came up to frame her face, gentle despite the strength in his fingers. We can take it slowly. We can figure it out together. Or if this isn't what you want, if I'm reading everything wrong, then we can pretend I never said anything and continue as we were. But I needed you to know. I needed you to understand why I can't let you go. Eileen's heart hammered against her ribs. She thought about everything that had led to this moment. The trap in the forest, the terrified cub, the king who'd offered her sanctuary. She thought about evening conversations and gentle touches. About the way Darius looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, like she was something precious and impossible. She thought about Ash's unconditional love. About belonging to a pack. About having a purpose beyond mere survival. I'm scared, she whispered. Me too. What if I'm not enough? What if I fail you or hurt Ash? Or, what if you don't? Darius leaned his forehead against hers. What if instead of catastrophizing we just try? See where this goes? I don't know how to be loved, Eileen confessed. I don't know if I'm capable of it. Then, I'll teach you. The same way you taught Ash how to heal. His breath was warm against her lips, close enough to kiss, but waiting for her permission. We'll learn together. Eileen made a choice. She closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his, tentative at first, testing. Darius made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, the kiss deepening into something that felt like falling and flying simultaneously. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Darius rested his forehead against hers again. "Stay," he murmured. "Not as Ash's companion. Not as an employee or obligation. Stay because you want to. Because you're choosing this, choosing us." "I'm choosing you," Eileen corrected. "Both of you. For however long you'll have me. Forever then." He smiled, the first truly unguarded smile she'd seen from him. "Because I'm not letting go." The Autumn Council concluded 3 days later with unprecedented cooperation between territories. The threat of the divided pack had unified nobles who'd spent years bickering over borders and trade routes. Funding was allocated for increased security, education programs to combat extremist ideology, and initiatives to strengthen human-shifter relations. And in a ceremony that surprised everyone, including Eileen, King Darius announced a new position, Ambassador of Integration, responsible for fostering cooperation between human and shifter communities. He offered the position to Eileen. "You've already proven you can bridge both worlds," he said before the assembled council. "You understand what it means to be an outsider in both communities. And you've earned the respect of this council through your courage and integrity. If anyone can build the bridges we need, it's you." Eileen stood before 200 nobles, wearing the silver medallion and Ash's rough circlet, and made a choice that would define her future. "I accept," she said clearly. "On one condition." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. It was bold, nearly rude to impose conditions on a king's offer. But Darius just smiled. "Name it." "That this position includes educational outreach. I want to establish schools in border villages, places where human and shifter children can learn together from a young age. Fear comes from ignorance. We fight it with knowledge." The council erupted into discussion, but Lord Corvain was nodding thoughtfully. "An interesting proposal. Expensive, but potentially effective. I'll fund it personally if necessary," Darius said. "Lady Eileen's condition is accepted. Let the record show that the position of Ambassador of Integration has been created and filled, effective immediately." The formal announcement was followed by celebration. That evening, there was a smaller, more intimate gathering in the royal wing, just the inner circle. Lady Helena, Commander Lyra, Captain Rowan, Master Benedict, and a few others who'd become something like family to Eileen over the past month. Ash was there too, of course, wearing his formal collar and sitting proudly at Eileen's feet. He'd grown noticeably in just a month, bigger, stronger, more confident. Soon he'd be old enough to shift to human form and finally speak the words he'd been storing up. "To new beginnings," Lady Helena said, raising her glass. "And to finding family in unexpected places." They drank, and talked, and laughed into the small hours of the morning. And when everyone finally departed, Eileen found herself alone with Darius on the balcony overlooking the thornwood. "You know they'll expect us to marry eventually," Darius said casually. "Court politics being what they are." Eileen's heart skipped. "Is that a proposal?" "Not yet. You're not ready, and neither am I. We've only just started this." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "But eventually. When you're ready, when we both are. I want you to be my mate, Eileen. My partner. My queen." "That's a lot of pressure," Eileen murmured, leaning back against his chest. "You saved my son from rogues with a stick. I think you can handle a little political pressure." She felt him smile against her hair. "But there's no rush. We have time. All the time we need. What if the council objects? What if the council just watched you negotiate terms with their king and walk away with what you wanted? They're not going to object. If anything, they're terrified of you now." He turned her to face him. "Stop looking for reasons this won't work, and just be here. With me. With us." Eileen looked up at the man who'd saved her almost as thoroughly as she'd saved his son. At the king who'd offered her not just sanctuary but purpose. At the person who'd somehow, impossibly, fallen in love with the unwanted girl from Thornhaven. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll be here." "Good." He kissed her slow and sweet, and full of promise. "Because you're Pack now. And Pack means forever." 6 months later, on the first day of spring, Eileen stood in her office, a beautiful room in the palace's diplomatic wing, filled with books and maps and correspondence from a dozen territories. She'd just returned from establishing the first integrated school in a border village, where human and shifter children now learned together. The work was hard. Not everyone welcomed change. But slowly, incrementally, she was building bridges. A knock at the door announced Ash, now able to shift to human form, a lanky 7-year-old with his father's gold eyes and a smile that could light up rooms. "Eileen." He bounded in, all enthusiasm. "Guess what? Father says I can start training with the sword next month. I'm going to be the best warrior in all the territories." "I'm sure you will," Eileen said, hugging him. "But you're also going to keep up with your reading lessons, right?" "Do I have to?" "Yes." "Fine," he grinned. "Father also says to tell you dinner's ready, and that he loves you. He made me promise to say that part exactly, even though it's embarrassing." Eileen laughed. "Tell him I love him too, and that I'll be there in 5 minutes." Ash ran off, his voice echoing through the corridors as he returned to his father. Eileen took a moment to look around her office at the life she'd built, the purpose she'd claimed, the family she'd chosen. On her desk sat 3 items: the Silver Star of Valor, Ash's rough circlet from that first ceremony, and a new addition, a betrothal ring from Darius, offered 2 weeks ago under the stars. The wedding was planned for midsummer, a celebration that would unite not just 2 people but symbolically bridge the gap between humans and shifters. Eileen touched each item in turn, then picked up the ring and slipped it on her finger. It felt right, solid, real, earned. She'd come to the Thornwood looking for herbs and found a destiny instead. She'd saved a wolf cub and gained a family. She'd been nobody and become someone who mattered. Eileen stood, smoothed her dress, and walked toward the dining hall where Darius and Ash waited. Where her family gathered for the evening meal. She'd collapsed after saving a wolf cub from rogues, and when she woke, she'd found she'd saved herself too. Not all prisons had walls. Not all escapes required running. Sometimes, salvation came from the simple act of choosing to be brave when it mattered most. Sometimes the girl who thought she deserved nothing found she deserved everything. And sometimes, the unwanted daughter became the queen who changed the world. Epilogue. 5 years later, the Thornwood bloomed with spring wildflowers, as Eileen walked its paths with confidence born of familiarity and love. Beside her, Ash, now 12 and already showing signs of the powerful alpha he'd become, chattered about his upcoming trials. "And then I'll finally get my official rank in the guard," he said excitedly. "Father says I'm ready." "Do you think I'm ready?" "I think you've been ready since the day you stood on 3 legs to defend me," Eileen said, smiling. "But the trials aren't just about skill. They're about judgment, knowing when to fight and when to show mercy." "I know." His expression turned serious. "You taught me that, both of you did." They walked in companionable silence until they reached a clearing, the same clearing where Eileen had found a trapped cub 5 years ago. A memorial stood there now, a stone marker commemorating the moment that had changed everything. Here, courage bridged 2 worlds. Here, a life was saved, and a future was born. Here, we learned that kindness is not weakness, and that family is not always blood. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd kept walking?" Ash asked quietly. "If you'd ignored me?" "Every day," Eileen admitted. "And every day, I'm grateful I didn't. You gave me a life worth living, Ash. You and your father both. You gave us that too." He hugged her. He was almost as tall as she was now, growing so fast. "You're the best mother I could have asked for. I hope you know that." Tears pricked Eileen's eyes. She'd never pushed Ash to call her mother. He had memories of his birth mother that she'd never try to replace. But hearing it still meant everything. "Come on," she said, composing herself. "Your father's waiting for us. And you know how he gets when we're late for family dinner." They walked back toward the palace, mother and son, human and shifter, proof that love could bridge any divide. In the royal chambers, Darius waited with their daughter, 2-year-old Catherine, named for Eileen's mother. She had Eileen's dark hair and Darius's gold eyes, and she toddled toward Eileen with absolute confidence that she'd be caught. "Mama," she squealed. "Up." Eileen scooped her up, kissing her chubby cheeks while Catherine giggled. Darius wrapped his arms around both of them, completing the circle. Another school opened today, Eileen reported. In the western reaches, that makes 17 across all territories. 17 bridges, Darius murmured. How many more do you need? As many as it takes. She looked up at him, at the man who'd become her partner in every sense. Until every child, human or shifter, can grow up without fear. Until the divided pack's ideology is nothing but a bad memory. Then we'll build them together. He kissed her forehead. All of us. Family. Pack, Ash corrected, grinning. Same thing, Eileen said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The girl who'd once been unwanted had found her place. The woman who'd been broken had become whole, and the queen who'd started with nothing now had everything that mattered. Love, purpose, family, home. She'd saved a wolf cub, and in doing so, she'd saved herself. And so, Eileen's story ends. Or perhaps, it's just beginning. Here's my question for you. If you could go back and tell the girl scrubbing those butcher shop floors that she'd one day be a queen, would she have believed you? Or do we only recognize our own strength after we've already used it? If Eileen's journey from invisible to invaluable moved you, please show your support with a like. And tell me in the comments, which character's growth surprised you most? Eileen's, Darius's, or Ash's? Thank you for being part of this story. Your time, your attention, your compassion, they all matter. See you in the next tale.